Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
After graduating from high school with honors, having won several state biology competitions, Miranda decided to enter the best university in the country to study psychiatry. Her father was completely supportive, and everything else. He was a gutless, weak, and left-handed man, incapable of making any decisions. When he was fired from a job he had worked half his life at, he was not at all upset, but simply went to work for the same company, only in the lowest position, because that was all he had to do. And he had no desire to fight for his future. Miranda had to pull the family down on himself since childhood. His father couldn't make decisions like whether to take a phone on credit or to save up the full amount to pay it off at once, so he left the decision to his 10-year-old daughter. At first she was flipping a coin to decide what she should do. But soon she realized it was impractical and started drawing tables from the column, pros and cons. Learning to make choices as early as 13, she was telling her father what he should do. And it was as if she was replacing the role of wife or mother in his life. Miranda had to learn to take responsibility not only for herself, but for the whole family, which, however, consisted of only 2 people. Her mother, Joan, when Miranda was 8 years old, went on watch in Alaska, where geographers set up a base, going on a scientific expedition. Joan had to help them with household things, cleaning, cooking meals, doing their laundry. Heartily, after saying goodbye to her family, she left and was due back in a few months. But no one ever saw her again, anywhere. Miranda received a letter from the sponsors of this scientific expedition that her mother had gone for a morning walk one day. Having performed her routine duties, she was calm at peace, with life boiling inside her, and nothing to portend trouble. But as soon as she left, there was no further news of her. Miranda's father, already accustomed to his wife's constant departures, was not worried when he saw her off once again. But when the news came that his beloved wife was incarcerated, his heart was missing. It broke just at that moment, the metaphorical section of the brain that was responsible for the will ceased to function and eventually completely vaporized. It was as if the will had been cut out of him. You could say that it began a process of decaying personality decomposition that was merciless and unstoppable, a disease for which mankind had not yet devised a cure. Miranda herself had always taken her mother's departures painfully. It was as if each time a piece of her soul was stolen from her, a piece that always came back. But this time, when she received that fateful letter, Miranda realized that a part of her soul, in the warmest, most valuable, most important, no one would ever give it back to her. What was surprising was that she didn't cry, looking questioningly at her father, as if subconsciously wanting to understand the right reaction or not. She saw that he was looking at the letter with a stone face, in which it was impossible to read the feelings, so she decided that the absence of her tears was normal. There are never right or wrong reactions in such cases, and after all, everyone reacts differently to grief. However, if one looked deep into Miranda's mind, it would become clear she did not cry at all. Not because any emotional expressions were missing because of the shock, but because there was no shock at all. Every time she drifted off deep into consciousness, Miranda realized that her mother might not return. This letter was not news to her. Her mom's disappearance formed the basis of her identity because it happened at the very peak of her formation. It formed the foundation on which all subsequent beliefs were built, not to be close to anyone, not to love anyone. Attachment only causes pain. Only career is important in life. One should only take care of oneself. You can't rely on anyone. These beliefs became her dogmas, sacred thoughts that she followed in every incomprehensible situation. She had no friends. She never went out with anyone. She repressed all feelings. If she could fall in love with someone, she immediately nipped it in the bud, not allowing the feelings to develop. This helped her to achieve great success in life. After all, she lived not only in the era of capitalism, and therefore in the era of selfishness, but also in the most developed capitalist country, where the personal interests of the individual were put above the interests of society. The whole system in which she lived encouraged her selfishness and alienation from people. From what did all this develop in her with redoubled vigor? Nothing existed in her life but herself and her studies. She didn't go out. She didn't rest. Turning herself into a robot to perform the tasks assigned to her, to do her homework, to get the highest score, to win at the Olympics, to graduate with honors, to enter the best university. This is how she lived to the days from which the main events of this story begin. Entering a prestigious university as a psychiatrist, she studied there for 2 years before they started her internship. The internship was at the Central State Psychiatric Hospital, which was both a mental health center where they locked up particularly dangerous lunatics, treated the mentally ill, and helped with nervous system problems. It was a prison and a treatment center in one person. There were several centimeters of snow on the roads, which made driving very difficult. And on the first day, Miranda got to the hospital instead of the planned 40 minutes, 3 o'clock. It was snowing in hail, creating a blanket of snow in front of her eyes, which prevented her from seeing properly, and she missed several of her stops. The buses were crowded. There was an atmosphere of anger and tension in the air, which only fueled every passenger that was late for something. The driver honked so loudly she could hear it. Honking through vacuum headphones, screamed infants, and pushed herself off the bus. Miranda was finally on the outside and walked calmly to the hospital. She almost slipped a few times on the thick ice. The main building was of the old construction seen everywhere in the mid-20th century. Concrete walls with a fine stone facade flat roof, 3 stories and a visor in front of the entrance. That sheltered a large metal door that gave the feeling of entering a bunker or some extreme protected place. Passing through the guard at the entrance that sat in front of a small desk that looked like a school desk. And the opposite happened through the queue at the reception desk, which stretched across the whole hall and went to the exit she needed in the courtyard. Left turn, right turn behind the gate, around the corner. Down the stairs, a new turn. The layout of the building was like the layout of a labyrinth, so easily one could get lost in the endless corridors and offices. Miranda noticed an amazing property of the hospital from the outside. It seemed several times smaller than the inside, which further emphasized the overall irregularity and illogicality of the building. Passing through the couloirs, she finally made her way to the backyard. A wide paved road led her through an endless amount of construction and other buildings with unknown contents. A large playground opened up to her. What was in the cage was behind a metal 4-meter fence with barbed wire on top of it. Inside, a group of children were playing ball. She couldn't stop and take a closer look at them for 2 reasons. She was running late, and the children's probation officer. As soon as she noticed the curious gaze, Miranda immediately gestured sternly for her to go on about her business. Older women in work jackets were shoveling snow and throwing out trash. Passing through a narrow opening between the buildings, she found herself in front of a 5-story building that had obviously been built recently. But she didn't notice any significant differences, except for the clean and neat facades. Once inside, she found herself in a small room, from which she could either enter another maze of corridors or go up the stairs, which she did, climbing to the 3rd floor. She saw a thick metal door that was locked. She knocked, and one of the nurses opened it, looking through the peephole. The door was locked and had a big chain that couldn't be broken. The nurse, like everyone else here, was dressed in a blue suit, slippers, pants, and a t-shirt. Miranda stepped inside. In front of her was a large, cheap table that served as the watch of this ward, behind which sat her fellow student. Together with her, they were interning here. To the right down the corridor were the wards. To the left there were also wards, but in addition to that you could get to the office of the head of the ward and to the canteen. A fellow student, Grace, told Miranda she had to go to the supervisor's office. Grace was a nice girl, and despite all her prejudices about the people she lived with, treated her well and to some extent even sympathized with her. She also studied well, was purposeful, strong-willed, and initiative. That is, she possessed all the qualities Miranda valued. It was difficult to call them friends because they had never even gone anywhere together. And they were not strangers either. There was only one major difference between them. Grace loved people. Miranda walked down the corridor. There were cameras everywhere, that like the eye of God were watching everything that was going on. A sense of paranoia, a haunting constant surveillance, like paranoid schizophrenia, born in Miranda's soul. Surveillance, surveillance, surveillance. Everywhere you go there's surveillance. That's how people go crazy. But I guess it's for the good of the patients. The camera feed was on the TV in reception, but it didn't look like anyone cared. Everyone was busy with themselves and their phones. If a patient wanted to do something to himself or other patients, how would they know about it if no one looked at the cameras? What kind of attitude is that? Sneaking glimpses past the ward doors. Miranda tried to pass them quickly and quietly, but at the same time I peered into each one. The wards were small, but there was enough space to fit 4 beds, a closet, and small nightstands adjacent to each bunk. On the far wall was a window with bars and blinds so that the patients could lower them themselves. There were no handles to the windows. They had been taken out and hidden, so no one but the nurses could open the windows. And as Miranda found out later, it was not even possible to open the window completely. All the patients were asleep. It was now quiet hour. Some, especially the violent ones, were tied to the bed with thick ropes and were not allowed to move their legs and arms. The nurse Mitya walked back and forth along the corridor to see if everyone was asleep, because it was considered that daytime sleep was very important for the patients and their recovery. Through the windows on the right side of the corridor, we could see the courtyard of the building, which was ring-shaped. There was a dome over the courtyard, and the courtyard itself served as a winter garden that was constantly monitored and cared for. There were benches placed there, flowers growing, and small trees planted in the windows on the other side. Miranda saw patients walking there, one of them an elderly man just standing there in a stupor looking at this winter garden, not moving at all. A nurse came up to him and gently, even, Miranda thought, somewhat demurely escorted him to his room. On the lower floor was the psychoethical ward. There were mostly elderly people there with their respective problems, and young people who were most likely to be there because of the military enlistment, because anyone with any mental problems had to spend a month there for evaluation. But as Miranda was told, there was no examination at all, and the teenagers just lived there for a month in absolute idleness, without the possibility to go outside the hospital. It was only on the last day that they had a conversation with a professor who gave his verdict supposedly based on observations. What did the nurses do in a month regarding the patient in the Miranda ward? It was different. Here all patients went around in special brown, green, striped uniforms. You couldn't use phones or any technology at all. Go outside. Go for walks. No one was allowed to visit them, and all parcels were strictly searched. It was strictly forbidden to bring in coffee or even sodas, or anything that tasted good at all. It was for the good of the patients, because given the drugs they were taking, there were many things they couldn't have. Why weren't the patients on this ward allowed to visit? What is this nonsense? Are they not human beings and don't need simple human communication with their families? Surely there must be a logical explanation for this, which Miranda would find out later. After all, she sincerely believed in the rightness of justice, logic, and honesty of the healthcare and system. After all, she didn't become a psychiatrist for nothing. I knocked on the door. She went into the superintendent's office, which was very different from the other rooms in the place. 2 oak desks where the superintendent and her assistant sat, 2 black leather couches for visitors, many different abstract paintings, shelves overflowing with documents and computers. Miranda noticed the painting that hung behind the superintendent's desk. It depicted a metaphysical portrait made up of nothing but sharp angles, making it seem harsh, rough, unsettling, and unpleasant to the eye. The portrait was done in a black and white graphic style, filled with patterns as angular as himself. There were so many patterns that they turned to mush and did not form an overall coherent composition. What could have conveyed any meaning? Unless absolute ugliness, chaos, and lack of integrity and ugliness were considered meaning. Stakeholder. I was sitting at my desk reading something on my computer. She was a blonde woman. Miranda wouldn't have pegged it over 40. She wore the same uniform as the nurses, only it was white, which went well with the color of her hair. On her eyes were fancy glasses of the type worn by most of the students at Miranda University. She was slender with a good figure like a porcelain figurine and full breasts. Her eyes were open. Her lips were plump and her skin was as white and fair as the moon in every sense. It was a beautiful woman. "What is that painting on your wall?" Miranda asked after the greeting, pointing to the portrait. "This was painted for me by one of my past patients." "What was lying here?" "It's a metaphysical portrait of me. I like it very much." Miranda decided to refrain from expressing her opinion and only try to smile kindly. But it was as crooked as the portrait itself. "My name is Lisa, and for the next few months you will be working here with me as your internship. And at the end of it, I will write my report on your work and your qualifications to your supervisor at the university. Your name must be Miranda." "That's correct. You can familiarize me with what's going on here." "Nothing out of the ordinary. I envy the psychiatric wards for the seriously ill. You can see the daily schedule in the hallway at the front desk. The nurses will tell you when and how many pills to give out. During quiet hours, you should make sure that no one leaves their rooms. No one is allowed outside. If you have any questions for me, I'm always happy to help. I take care of my patients and make sure they're doing well. That means diet, stable medication, and most importantly, the same routine. Any patient needs a stable and predictable routine, especially the mentally ill. Please take that into consideration. Although I'm sure you already know that, I will ask the assistant to show you around and introduce you to everyone." A few minutes later, Miranda was already walking with the young assistant and Veronica, who explained everything to her. They walked through all the wards on the floor where only men were lying down. On the face of it, if you didn't look closely, they were the most ordinary men, except that their gaze was aloof, empty, lost, as if a non-drinker had gotten very drunk for the first time. Miranda knew what drugs were given here and understood perfectly well what effect they would have, but she'd never experienced it personally, and it puzzled her, if not shocked her. Poor people are like prisoners here. But on the other hand, prisons don't cure people, they cripple them. Unlike psychiatric hospitals. Yes, there's a ward for mentally ill criminals, although Miranda didn't understand the point of their existence. After all, any criminal, in fact, is already mentally ill, with serious mental disabilities. But she didn't work in one. All of the man's patients were calm. Miranda thought that they were not violent themselves, and that there were some other wards for the violent. She didn't know that she was in just such a ward. And just before quiet time, people were dosed with strong doses of sleep medication. They went up to the 4th floor, which was no different from the previous one, and walked through the women's wards, which smelled a little better. She noticed that all the patients were very dirty. Their hair smelled greasy. Then the clothes smell of power, as if she'd been transported back to her high school days. She was locked in the men's locker room again by her classmates. Veronica answered her that the patients wash once a week. Why not more? She doesn't know that. The utility bills would probably be prohibitive in that case, and their hospital budgets aren't that big. What's at the other end of the hallway? Miranda pointed to the opposite end of the hallway from the dining room. There are private rooms. The patient's family or the patient can pay for a private room if they don't want to live with someone else. There's a separate shower that runs 3 times a week separately, and a toilet, a TV, a better bed, and a desk. But isn't socialization the key factor? The recovery of the mentally ill, especially a seriously ill person. Well, I don't know. That's not for me to ask. Veronica's starting to brush it off. Often patients don't have the money to live there anyway, and their families don't care about them, so they can't pay for them. We usually put the most violent ones in there. who won't let their roommate sleep, for example, or otherwise interferes with their peace of mind. So you isolate the violent ones. To do what? To make them more socially withdrawn. That's not a question for me. Veronica hesitated. Please don't ask me questions I can't answer. It annoys me. I'm sorry, who lives in these wards now? I turned my attention to her words, Miranda. No one, as far as I know. No, there's a woman who's the heaviest patient I've had in the whole time I've been working here. She's been here before me for who knows how many years. You don't have to worry about her. She's being handled by a separate, specially trained nurse. The news of the mysterious patient certainly interested Miranda, but not enough for her to do anything about it. By the time they'd gotten around to it, the quiet hour was over. She realized this because someone started banging on someone's bed very loudly with an iron stick. A frightened man came running in. She saw that it was one of the orderlies, a sturdy man about 30 years old in reddish and uniform. Miranda tried to stop him, but he pushed her away roughly. For a moment, there was a look of bewilderment on his face, which quickly changed to anger. Then he poked something and walked away. What are you doing? Grace ran up to her. I mean, what does that look like to you? Sabotage. Sabotage. Miranda smiled ironically. You can't break the rules here, but it's an atrocity. How can you treat people like that? She almost shrieked with indignation. They're not people. They're severely mentally ill. There's nothing human left in them. Believe me, I've seen that in the time I've been working here without you, after handing out the pills to everyone. Miranda calmly sat down on the watch and dived into the abyss of her thoughts about this place. Her eye suddenly fell on the television with cameras, where she saw that one of the male patients had covered himself head to toe with a blanket, thereby as if leading a fortress around him, and doing something under it, as it was constantly moving, picking something out of it. Just in case, she decided to quickly run and check what he was doing. There was no one in his room because everyone had left for dinner. He sat there alone, protected, impregnable by the walls of the fortress, which Miranda had to storm just to get that blanket off him. When she finally did, a guy in his mid-20s huddled in the corner of his bed, knees drawn up to his chest, head covered, ready to strike. Distraught at this unexpected reaction, Miranda looked at the bed and saw that the guy was drawing a portrait with a pencil. It was her portrait. How accurate, how sensual, how graceful. She hadn't realized she was so beautiful. The careful curves of her face, the barely visible cheekbones, the lips that are as if on red roses, the eyelashes like waves that are visible from the seashore, and the eyes, like a whole landscape of the soul. How beautiful, how could he have had time to paint this in less than a day that it is here? And most importantly, than with this pathetic, simple school pencil, or rather even its stump without a rubber band. Unbelievable. What's going on here? A rough man's voice came from behind me. It was the man who was banging on the bed. Pencil. Drawing is not allowed. He howled. Immediately his howl was met by the underground men, the helpers, and all together, they started beating the poor guy, gagging him with their clubs. A blow, a second blow. The third blow hit him in the head. The guy crawled off the bed, curled up and covered his head, and started screaming in a way Miranda had never heard before. This pathetic, insignificant thing. And from that in her heart, like needles, the shriek pierced through it. She was in so much pain that she could not even move, but only silently watched the process that in a flash promised the workers of this hospital. Her aloofness, coldness, some arrogance, indifference evaporated in an instant, changed by simple, natural, living, human compassion. Her heart opened like a bud on a tree. It blossomed and bloomed in the spring at the most terrible, ghastly, and inopportune moment, leaving behind a deep cut. Blow. Blow, 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 everything repeated. They didn't stop. The boy didn't fight back. He just yelped like an angry cat being attacked by a dog. Finally, they stopped, threw him on the bed, tied him up, took his pencil drawing, and went to the superintendent's office. Miranda waited until they came out and went into the office. During this time, her fear and compassion were replaced by hatred and anger. "What do you think you're doing?" From the threshold she yelled. "And you about the drawing?" asked Lisa calmly, adjusting the keyboard on the desk. "Well, what did you want?" Pencils and paper are not to be used by patients in the heavy ward without the supervision of doctors or other staff. It is for their own good, because with a pencil they can hurt not only themselves, but also the people around them who share their woes. And with the help of paper they can start a fire, which has already happened, because of which we had to lock up one of these violent and especially dangerous patients in a separate ward, which are actually intended for those who can buy it. And she lives there for free. We don't do anything to harm our patients. We do everything for their own good. She spoke aloofly and as if to herself. But even in prison the conditions are better. Miranda boiled up. "We are all kind of imprisoned sick people here. The nurses, my assistant, and even myself, we are all prisoners of this place. We're attached to it. Yes, in a normal prison the conditions might be better. But this is a special prison for special people. It's you prisoners who pray here every day, go to the hairdresser, get your hair styled, get your nails done. You sleep in a soft bed in the warmth of your own home. You see your husband and children, if you have them. Eat normal food, go out with your girlfriends. You're the one who's a prisoner here. Listen, girl." She stood up, walked over to Miranda, and looked her in the eyes almost point blank. Her always simple and so carefree expression changed abruptly to grim, cold, stern. Her speech became harsher. "Either you do your long internship on my terms, or you're out. From there you get the most paltry report of your work. Whatever I can come up with, I see." Palms went cold. A lump appeared in his throat that you couldn't with a glob of dagger, took a step back, and then almost ran out of the office, slamming the door. Standing in front of the office was a rat who had come running in here immediately when he heard some noise and had overheard the conversation from the beginning. "What are you doing? You're out of your mind. Are you trying to get out?" Her motherly mentor turned on her, a tone Miranda couldn't stand. She hated to be bossed around and told what to do. And yet she herself wasn't far behind, straying from her will. She tried to push her away, but she got in her way. I personally saw a patient slash his veins with a pen not like a light bulb. They started a fire when they set a blanket on fire. Think of what they can do with pencil and paper. It's all done for their own good and our peace of mind. Don't fight back against it. And don't try to improve what is already working. You as a woman should understand that, shouldn't you? You could hear the tone in her, the kind of tone one hears in deeply religious people who make up an atheist. To be fair, Miranda did note that all the lamps in the building were behind bars and thick glass. It was just so hard to get them out. Maybe all these inhumane atrocities are really being done for good. "Come on, I'll show you something," Grace said. They went outside, went behind a building and came to a small 2-story structure that looked like the main hospital building. There were bars on all the windows, even on the first floor. The space between the bars that had them was so small that you could barely put your hand through them. A deafening shriek from within reached their ears, turning over all their insides, mixing them into mush. A helpless, unnatural, a wild animal howl, like that of an animal being chased by wolves. It was so strange that it seemed like it wasn't a sound at all, but a living entity with no physical shell that crept through bars and walls, that climbed the 2 girls and anyone else who heard it right into their souls. It affected Miranda so much that she covered her ears. But it was as if it even made him louder. "What's in here?" Miranda asked, trying to shout over the screams. "The children's ward, an orphanage for mentally ill children. If you're under 18, but you suddenly get childhood depression, they put you in here. If you're violent, or if you're hyper-aggressive, you're violent. Believe me, kids can do a lot of things. Sometimes they can be even scarier than adults. They're gonna put you in here too. So this is where they put the violent and the non-violent. That's right. I don't think it's right. And it shouldn't be the case that the difficult patients are put in with the normal ones. But what we have is what we have. These children are often not even wanted by their parents. They are completely derelict, and only these walls can shelter them and even help them somehow. Of course, not everything here is perfect, but where can we see this very ideal? Everything is in the process of becoming, and this place is no exception. Through the bars on the windows, the interior of the rooms was slightly visible, painted with flowers, walls, scattered toys, fluffy carpets, and soft sofas. As soon as the children saw that they were being looked at through the window, they immediately ran up and started beckoning the girls to stay back. We are strictly forbidden to have contact with them. Trying to stop Miranda Gray, but it was too late. Little hands reached through the bars. Miranda immediately noticed one boy. He was like a prince. His eyes were as if they were holy. He was all affectionate, velvet, silk, pure, the embodiment of absolute goodness and light. I wanted to hug him, to soak in his bright and pure energy, to recharge and share it with other people, that he was as fluffy as a soft toy bear. The boy has forgotten what his life put the boy here for. "Why are you here?" Intoxicated by the mindfulness, she asked. "I have ADHD, is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. My parents put me here for treatment. But is ADHD such a danger to society that you would isolate children from the outside world on the pretext of treatment? Something's wrong here. You're allowed to go out." "No, only with the doctor. We go into a cage with a playground inside and play there for half an hour a day. We can't go out anymore. We don't have cell phones either. We can't call our parents or talk to anyone. We can't visit us either." What is this? What did the children do to deserve this fate? Does the fact that they have some kind of mental problem deserve to be isolated from society and, in fact, imprisoned? Why is this world so cruel to them? Let's go. We're not allowed to talk to them. Grace was worried. Wait. A girl's voice was heard, gathering through the crowd near the window. A girl about 11 years old found herself in front of Miranda. Only a barrier of bars separated them. As soon as Miranda saw her, she turned pale. It was hard to describe what frightened her so much. It seemed to her as if this girl had stepped out of the pages of Dostoevsky's novels. A girl mentally unhealthy with consumption and a fracture in her soul, which was vividly reflected in the character's gaze. Except it wasn't a character, it was a real person. She had never seen anything like it before. A sharp, bold, and extremely nervous look. It was as if every nerve in her nervous system was inflamed to the point where she could feel her own hair growing. Her movements were abrupt, as if two sharp knives were passing over each other's blade and forming sparks to catch the eyes of everyone watching her. Unwittingly interacting with her, even just being near her, you succumbed to her nervousness and became restless yourself. It was as if you began to worry about the movement of planets around the solar system, the movement of galaxies around other galaxies, the movement of all galaxies around the centers of the universe. You understood the inevitable collapse of the universe, felt with all your soul the inevitable end that was approaching at the speed of light. And from this you fell into a terrible nervousness with contempt, looking at people who did not understand it, and himself with his whole body, realizing the perishability and inevitable end of life. "Give me your cell phone right now. I need to call my parents right away. They don't know I'm here. They're probably looking for me by now. I just need to tell them where I am. Give me your phone quickly and clearly," she said, like she was giving instructions to her subordinates. "Girl, what's wrong with you? Why are you sitting here? What did you get in here for?" Miranda still couldn't move away from her impression. "Just give me your phone. What is this here? What department are you from?" Girl heard a voice behind the back of the crowd of guys. "Quickly answer, where are you from? Do you have any idea what crime you are committing?" The voice of the warden sounded from all sides. "Let's run," Grace said, leaving Miranda behind her. "You've had it. I warned you," she said as they entered the ward. "Those kids have even been walking around in that boy's cage since he was 9 years old." Does he deserve to be in that prison? It's literally a prison. Although even in prisons, inmates are allowed to communicate with their families sometimes. I showed you these poor children not so that you could empathize with them and become disillusioned with the system, but so that you could understand that these are not children. These are evil entities that hide under the guise of children. They are liars, marginalized, and potential murderers. You think that boy, that seemingly innocent holy boy, told you the truth. I saw him brought here myself, and I asked Lisa why he was here. It's simple. He attacked his parents with a knife while they were asleep. Yes, he does have his girl. But that's not the only thing on his list of ailments. I'm not even gonna name it for you. See, look, he just blatantly lied to your face with such an innocent look that you couldn't even suspect him of anything. And yet, it's not a human being anymore. He may even have been born an animal. And there was never anything human about him, though even an animal would not attack its parents, especially when they are asleep. The system works. Yes, it may seem at first glance that these people are being treated inhumanly. Remind me, they're subhumans. Miranda didn't find the whole rant very convincing. Yes, she used to think that way about people with mental disabilities herself. But when she met them in person, her opinion had changed dramatically. No matter what they did, no matter what disorder they had, they're still people who just can't be treated like that. And most importantly, where it's happening in her country, in the epicenter of a bright and fair capitalist society. True, she wasn't sure if the sick would have been treated differently under a different system, but still, she had seen how they were treated under this system. She strongly disliked it. When they got to their floor, they were immediately summoned by the supervisor to talk to her. Grace, didn't I tell you last time that you're not allowed to talk to the kids in the children's ward? She put her fists on her waist. You did, Lisa, and I took it all into consideration. I wanted to show Miranda how our system works, that it is fair and everyone gets what they deserve. But she didn't agree and started talking to the kids who were suspicious of her. I tried to stop her, but she was too stubborn and persistent, so I was unsuccessful. Unfortunately, I can't be held accountable for the actions of the people around me. And even more unfortunately, despite that, you have to answer for my actions and Miranda's actions. Well, I give you my word of honor that I took into account my past mistake and with the children did not utter a word. Talking to them strictly was Miranda's initiative alone, and I had nothing to do with it, unless you consider it complicit that I took her to them. But again, I only did it out of the goodness of my heart. All right. Aha. I believe you. You may go, and you and I will talk separately, she said with the look of an eagle that has been hovering over its prey for hours, waiting for it to exhaust itself. The mud came out, and they were left alone. It was like God's judgment on a sinner who had been guilty of at least killing his neighbor. Why are you doing this? She said, rising from her chair. And valiantly, seating herself on one of the sofas, Miranda continued to stand. And then, because I can't do otherwise. Freedom is a major aspect of human life that cannot be taken away, no matter what a person does. So, according to you, we should let all maniacs and pedophiles out of prisons. Even in prison, one can remain a free man. Freedom is in the mind. And these children, you get into their heads when their thinking is not yet formed and take away the very essence of this freedom, cut it off at the root. You rob them of any attempt to be free. That's right, because they're not human. They'd been stripped of everything human since they were born. They're the embodiment of everything animal that's human. They're a bundle of instincts and emotional reactions. They need to be isolated from society because they're a threat to society. Someone has to do it, and that's why I'm calling for this mission to be carried out on my shoulders. How can you say that? Don't you see the contradiction here? You yourselves have become the very people you're fighting against. You are not human. I've had enough. I'm not going to stand for it or have anything to do with it. You can complain all you want. I don't care. So instead of fighting the problem, you just kill it. Funny, she grinned caustically. And how are you different from the other pathetic fighters against the system? Unfortunately, after what you've done here, I can't just let you go. You have to fulfill your punishment. And what have I done, exactly? A tingling feeling of fear arose in her chest. You have broken the rules, and every offense is punished. And you can't practice anywhere else because we're the only psychiatric hospital in this town. So think about it. Do you want to ruin your studies and your red diploma because of your principles and beliefs? She was right. Miranda did care about her diploma and her studies. She didn't want to lose any of it because it was the only thing that mattered to her in this life, and just saying goodbye to her like that would be stupid. Yes? And moreover, if she gave it up, she wouldn't be able to open her private clinic and help the unfortunate patients. What was her dream? A difficult choice was in front of her, but she had to make it. There's no other way. What kind of punishment are you offering me? We have one patient, a particularly violent one, who lives in a private room. From now on, the remaining 3 months of your practice, what are you doing here? Keeping an eye on her. I'm assigning you all her duties. If you're unhappy with anything, you'll get a negative review. It's your own fault for what you're about to experience. Miranda didn't object because she knew it was pointless. The news that there was such a patient in the hospital had piqued her interest the first time she had heard it from the assistant. And now she was to meet her in person. She had to get to her duties now and dispense the pills. She made her way to the watch, where Grace pulled a small container from a drawer that contained all the medications she needed in signed tables. Taking the appropriate container, she was horrified. The strongest pharmacies, tranquilizers, and other antibiotics suppressing the action of the nervous system, sedating a person, making a vegetable out of him. She knew perfectly well the combinations of the necessary drugs to treat schizophrenia. But the kind of combination she saw before her, she had only read about in the summaries of psychiatrists of the early 20th century, because that was not the way the drugs had been compensated for since then, because it was comparable to a lobotomy. The person would lose the remnants of consciousness and be like a poorly constructed robot. Challenging the appropriateness of the therapy, she wasn't going to get anything out of it anyway, because she had no say. So she just went up to the women's ward and opened the door. Interesting detail. All the ward doors in the women's ward were locked, unlike the men's ward. And the door to the private ward was no exception. Opening it, she saw her shoes left at the threshold. She walked further and stepped on the soft but old and worn carpet and saw an empty toilet with a stall and a shower. Finally, she walked into the room itself, where a woman lying face down against the back of the couch came into her view. She was clearly awake, as her legs were shaking with a moderately severe tremor. Even the woman paid no attention to the new nurse at first. That the nurse was new, she realized by the sound of her footsteps, which was strikingly different. It was softer, neater, and more ingratiating. New, she heard a low and almost masculine, old man's hoarse voice. "Yes, I'm an intern here, and I've been assigned to take care of you. Turn around, please, and take your pills. What do you care, whether I take them or not?" Softly bellowed she. Her quiet voice was terrifying Miranda. "It's my job." Reluctantly, she said, "Leave it on the table. I'll drink it when you leave." "I'm afraid that's not possible. I have to watch you drink them." "I'll drink it. Where will I go?" "Leave it on the table," she said, as if to make a point. This was not at all the kind of encounter Miranda had envisioned when she walked into this room and saw the list of medications prescribed for the patient. She should at least look like someone with advanced autism or severe dementia, but certainly not talking so calmly and clearly, fully aware of her words and what was going on. Something was clearly wrong here. "Tell me, did the last nurse also not keep track of whether or not you were taking your medication?" "Yes, I was. I was taking that poison into myself." She still hasn't turned around, and the sound of her speech drifts into the back of the couch. "I'm afraid if you did take them, you wouldn't be talking to me so calmly." "Yeah, so you know what effect they're supposed to have. And you're offering them to me anyway." She grinned wryly. It's not up to me. Unfortunately, I can't influence it. You know, it's only my first day here, and I've already seen such inhuman atrocities as I've read about in documents. From the concentration camps where the Nazis experimented on people. Poor children locked in a cage even when they are out walking, prevented from calling their parents at least once a month. How guys were beaten up for drawing my portrait with a pencil on paper because he could supposedly hurt himself or someone else with that pencil. So I'd hate to give you these pills, but I'm afraid I have no other choice. So I'm not the only crazy person here who realizes that this isn't the way it's supposed to be. Tell me, how do you know what these drugs do? I used to be a doctor. I used to go on expeditions with scientists where I had to monitor their physical and mental health. So I know very well what strong peace and tranquilizers are. Then how did you manage to keep your sanity after that? Willpower and no magic. She laughed evilly, not at all like a woman. Will you have to take these pills? Or will I be forced to call an orderly who will make you do it? And then how will you be any different from the people who locked up those kids or beat up that kid? Nothing. Miranda was finally confused and lost the initiative and control in the dialogue. So just leave the poison on the table and let me drink it myself, without your supervision. Miranda realized that she was walking on thin ice already on the very first day of her 3-month practice, and if she didn't stand her ground, that ice would break under the weight of her body, and she would choke on the water. Something had to be done, and the woman still hadn't even turned around to look at her. All right, I'll make you a deal. You put the pills in your mouth so the camera can record it. You drink water, but you don't swallow the drugs, and then you spit them out in the bathroom. And I walk away with peace of mind. And if anything, I can say that you drank them in front of me, and the responsibility for that act will be on your shoulders. Deal? Okay, I'll do it. The woman turned around and sat down on the couch. Then Miranda was able to examine her face, lost in fallen eyes with a paradoxically hard gaze that moved slowly, lazily, moving from one object to another, as if realizing that there was nothing new it could see anyway. The woman couldn't have been more than 55, but her face looked it, covered with overflowing wrinkles that one could mistakenly give her anything. 70. Her gray hair was neatly tied back in a ponytail, and to Miranda's surprise, were quite healthy, which didn't match her general appearance. The expression on her face was so emotional that it was impossible to understand her feelings. Her mouth was barely open as she spoke, and she should have been muttering to herself. But for some unknown reason, the voice could be heard clearly. It became obvious to Miranda that this was a complex person, rich in life stories, but very strong and strong-willed. It was the kind of person who remained free even in prison, and this was the first time she had ever seen such a person in person. Are you so divided on me? As if you've seen a giraffe for the first time. Miranda couldn't hide her chuckle. But or Medusa as you like. I'm not good at Russian, much less metaphor. Okay, give me your meds. There were some shouts and noises from the lower men's compartment, and Miranda rushed to them. There were 3 guys standing there, all no more than 20. One of them looked like a normal, healthy man. Another was clearly autistic, as if he were not here, but somewhere far away in space. And the third was like something that had come up from a lower dimension to the humans. What happened here? Miranda came and stood next to the orderly in Grace. That thing won't let me sleep, shouted the one who looked the most normal of the trio, pointing at the devil's son. And I'm trying to sleep, and he's standing over me. I tell him to back off, and he keeps standing over me, like he's breathing in my ear. And before that, I was on my way to the bathroom. He beat me to it on purpose, but I thought, okay, I waited for him to come out. He's done all his business. He comes out and he's so polite. He tells me to come in. I thought, isn't he that bad? But where to? I go into the bathroom, and there's a pile of his feces, and the whole cabin stinks. But what's wrong with that? He protested. And I, when we had tea in the dining room, said the one who was high in space. He stood over our table, and he was leaving. It was the first time I'd ever seen such a thing, and I wanted to. Sam asked him to leave, and he sat in a nearby chair and just listened to our conversation. I honestly don't know what it is. And we had to leave. Here, help us out, please. He was so clearly shocked that it even showed on his always cold face. Well, what do you say? I turned to the culprit. Why are they cursing at me? Discussing me when I'm sitting right next to them. And they do it in such a way that I can hear it. I'm supposed to enjoy hearing it. I just wanted to spend time with them to get to know them. And they kick me out, pour negativity on me. What did I do to deserve this? For forgetting to flush the toilet? Do I deserve that? Miranda couldn't figure out if he was such a good actor that he played innocence so believably, like a real psychopath, or if he was really insane, and in his opinion, hadn't done anything special. She couldn't make the decision that was expected of her for some reason, so she decided to take him to the superintendent. To put the responsibility on her, she, in turn, did not listen to anything, and just sent the guy to the ward for the violent, for disorderly conduct. Miranda and Grace went home together. So you were at that crazy woman's house, giving her pills playfully? Grace asked. She's not that crazy, just an ordinary unhappy person. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary about her. Well, lucky you. You'll be babysitting her for the rest of your internship. I've only got a month left here, and you've been having fun, she said. But there she met the nurse who had cared for the woman before her. You're taking the pills you were prescribed. How are you feeling? Is there any change in your condition? Without much interest, she asked. The woman was silent and looked at the nurse with a glassy stare, not understanding her words at all. The next question seemed to trigger the right mechanism in her. Where were you born? I was born on Pushkin Street in a spacecraft. Famous doctor by profession, is a mountaineer. In the people simpleton at work you were called so in doctors, so to speak, necessary. And this is a whole system. After all, if we add up all the numbers in the people, we get 360 units. And this is already the average salary of a mountaineer in the doctor's court. And the accountant works on the other line, on the line of doctors. Because there will be misfortune. And the doctor of sciences will treat the climber. That on the Murmansk Peninsula will come to him to climb the ladder of doctors. And how to climb this ladder? Asked the nurse, according to the already obviously long-prepared methodologies. But it is necessary to take a scalpel to insert the Murmansk Peninsula. And what do you get? TV, Miranda, or what? Everything is clear, said the nurse, and handed the patient to Miranda. As soon as she came out, the woman immediately changed in her face, and her glassy gaze seemed to straighten, to breathe life into it. She sat down comfortably on the couch and crossed her arms over her chest. Joanna, embarrassed. Why did you say those names? Why do you care, child? A chill ran down Miranda's back. Why did you say those names? Answer me. She clenched her hands into fists. Well, I said that tirade a long time ago. That fool to make her think that I have schizophrenia and that I am completely insane just came to mind. So I told you what? My name is Miranda and my mother's name was Joanna. I don't believe what you said. It's just something you said. You knew my mother from somewhere. Maybe I did. Why wouldn't I? Why are you talking to me? It's okay. He's just being the jerk to other people. Yeah, 'cause I heard you walking around and being outraged. And you're the first person I've ever heard here who didn't take this nonsense lying down and try to do something about it. So I thought you were your own man. Besides, who's gonna believe you that I'm normal? I've been here for 7 years pretending to be a camera, and they still haven't learned how to write sound. Tell me about your mom. Maybe I do know her. I don't remember much about her. I know she was a doctor, and she went to Alaska on a scientific expedition. And then my dad, and I got a letter saying she disappeared. A cold shiver ran through Miranda's body, a realization. Wait, what's your name? She couldn't believe it. Joanna. She realized it too. No way. Mom almost squealed in time, remembering they might be overheard. And Miranda. Daughter. Now she was a woman. And not just any woman, but a mother, by the look of her and her speech. The Jane of today was more like a sexless creature. Everything feminine in her had long since fallen asleep. But the long-awaited meeting with her daughter changed everything and awakened her dormant instincts. Her face changed at once. Her eyes filled with life, just like you. A lake that has been flooded with water. Her eyes no longer lazily glanced from object to object, but once again seemed to be searching for something new. Joanna seemed to come back to life in a flash, a couple of years younger. "Mommy, how did you get here?" "Miranda, this is not the best time or place for this conversation. When is your night shift next week? Come to my place. Just let me know in advance that you're coming and we'll talk it over. Now get going before we're suspected of anything." Miranda returned to the watch. Grace said something to her, but she just answered like a programmed robot on an answering machine with prepared phrases. "No, yeah, she doesn't know. Maybe she'll think about it." It was as if a curtain had fallen before her eyes. After the climax of the first half of the second act, the audience in her face was waiting for the continuation. They had been pulled out of the narrative at the most interesting point. Some of them even resented it. Is it possible to do such a thing? After all, everything had just finally moved to the action. Suddenly, this break is like a speed bump on a smooth road. "Miranda, look out the window, you see." Suddenly, a man's voice came from nearby. She didn't even notice that the guy had gotten her name wrong. She just turned her head in his direction and listened. The guy speaking to her was a guy who had dementia. Minorly pronounced, but still very noticeable. When you talk to someone with low-stage dementia, it's like talking to a 10-year-old kid. Yes, he understands what is being said to him. He responds, and it wouldn't be unusual if this 10-year-old kid hadn't settled into the body of a 20-year-old guy, which created a powerful dissonance. Everything he said could have been heard from a child who was just learning about the world and marveling at every little thing, but in no way from an adult. Even his gaze was Miranda. "You and see," he repeated. That consciousness was returning to her. "You see the construction site outside the window there. You see the tower crane there. So yellow, so beautiful. It makes you want to climb on it. Look how it moves. Left, right, and now left again. And now it's stopped, and it's lifting something. But that's just magic. How can he just pick something up with his big hook like that? Magic. I'm serious. I'd love to climb up on the tip of his nose and see what the ground looks like from above. Maybe even go skydiving. Wouldn't that be cool? I've never wanted to do that." "What, Rick? What are you talking about?" As if in her sleep, she tried to catch the gist of the conversation. "You're not listening to me at all." He was indignant. He pouted and stomped his feet. "I'll go to the headmistress, Lisa. I'll tell her all about you. You'll know how not to listen to me. She loves me, and she'll help me." "Doesn't she love you?" "That's what she told me. She doesn't love anybody here, but me, of course." "Rick, why are you sitting here again?" She's finally regained her senses. "Who says I'm sitting here? I'm taking a well-deserved vacation at the sanitarium. I'm being cared for, fed, entertained. It's true that I'm lying here with a psycho, but it's nothing like that. You don't think you're crazy? Why should I? I'm healthier than a bull. I'm the only normal one here. I look at all these fools who take pills. I feel sorry for them. I feel sorry for everyone here. Such miserable people." "You didn't answer. Why did they put you in that sanatorium?" "Oh, it's my crazy mom. I come home after tending to my flowers in the garden. She yells at me. Can you imagine? I don't do anything around the house. I don't go anywhere to work. She keeps yelling and yelling. So I thought I should shut her up with something. So I took a knife and threw it at her. It only gave her a little scratch. I swear, and she burned even more. And the way she looked at me. She took me here, said I needed treatment. And I told her she's the one who needs treatment. I'm healthier than her. All her antics. I could hardly contain a caustic laugh, and Miranda sank back into her thoughts. She woke up from this tragic dream only on the day she was on watch. That momentous day when she would learn the whole truth about her mother's disappearance. All the questions that had plagued her for so many years would finally find their answers. The light of truth would shine on the shadow of ignorance and obscurity. After working her day's work, she escorted a flight of most of the nurses, orderlies, and supervisor home, and stayed on watch to keep the ward in order. When she was satisfied that everyone was asleep, she went to Jonah's room. She had warned her the night before so she wouldn't fall asleep. She turned off the lights in the whole ward instead of the hallway lamp, supposedly having mixed up the switches. The cameras were not working. And she, calmly, without fear of being compromised, heavily opened the door to her mother's room for the fiddler. Jonah was sitting on the couch, staring into the non-working television. Miranda turned on the flashlight on her phone and put it between them. Joan looked worried. Her ever-present tremor in her legs was even worse than usual, and her gaze quickly ran from one detail of Miranda's appearance to another. "Mom, honey, tell me, why are you locked up in solitary confinement away from everyone and given such heavy medication?" When I got tired of the constant discussion of my person and the laughter behind my back from my hearty roommates, I decided to keep them awake. And when the orderlies came, I attacked them so that I would be considered violent and transferred to the ward for the violent. I thought it would be calmer there. I was wrong. I behaved calmly there, so they transferred me back here, and I repeated all the previous actions. And not being able to control me, they transferred me back to the violent ones. And then they brought me back again. When they were desperate, I forced them, for their own peace of mind, to move me to this separate ward where I would live in isolation from everyone else and not bother anyone. Why did they laugh at you? What did you do? What could you have done? How dare they laugh at you? Why couldn't you do anything against them? Stop them. Calm down, girl. Calm down. I couldn't fight back, because this is a mental institution. It's dangerous to fight with a psycho, especially when you're in your right mind. They laughed at me for my stories, for telling the truth. People don't like to be told the truth, especially the uncomfortable truth. Although, to be honest, I thought the things I was saying would fall on their ears, since they correlate with the thoughts of psychos. But I was wrong. All too often I was wrong. Mom, don't talk in riddles. What things? What inconvenient truth? Miranda was beginning to lose her patience. Forgive me, Miranda. Please forgive me for abandoning you, little one. It was unacceptable, but I had no other choice. Tell me everything from the beginning. From the moment you left on this expedition. Please tell me. I must know. I must know everything. I went on another watch. The only difference was that it was not somewhere in Siberia, but in Alaska. I had to monitor the condition of the expedition members, and I did it. Everything was fine, but suddenly it was person after person. People started disappearing. In front of my eyes, a man, talking to some voice that I heard. Only he went without a jacket in a heavy snowstorm and disappeared behind a shroud of snow. Following that voice, it was talking to him, saying something about punishment and karma for all his deeds, and as if accepting his death. The blizzard was so strong that you couldn't see anything farther than an outstretched arm. I immediately ran after him, but of course it was to no avail. His body was never found. The morale of the remaining 10 expeditioners began to drop. Everyone was worrying, arguing with each other, blaming, throwing, fighting. There was the first death due to the fault of the expedition members. They got drunk. 2 drunken healthy men conflicted with the accumulated anxiety, but one of them had a clear outcome. One night I went out to go to the toilet. The fire was still burning, and suddenly, it was something inexplicable, some kind of black cloud. It moved on our camp and swallowed it into itself. I tried to do something about it, tried to set it on fire, threw snow on it, doused it with gasoline, but all was fair. There was no hope. My tent was the only thing left untouched. There was nothing left for me to do but go to sleep so I could leave in the morning. Surprisingly, I fell asleep well. But the dream I had is this. You'll think I'm crazy, but I have to tell you. There was an old man talking to me. If it wasn't an old man, it was an old woman, or was it a young man? I don't know. I only remember that he had black spots instead of eyes. We were sitting in a completely white room with a window that seemed to hang in the air, and through it we could see our camp. I asked the old man what had happened to all my companions. Why had they suffered such a fate? To which he replied, "It's a punishment for sins. One had sexual fantasies about molesting children. Another had secret desires, murder. A third cheated on his wife when he had a sick daughter, ruining her life. When the truth came out, a fourth was cheating people out of grants, laundering money from his high school friend who was a member of a criminal gang. The others had a similar story. But why wasn't I taken with them? Because I was clean, going on shifts away from home to feed my family, to raise you, my little girl. That's why they didn't hurt me and I survived. In the morning, I found the only snowmobile right in front of my tent left for the nearest settlement, from where I called for help. When help arrived, I told everything in great detail how it was. But to me, of course, what could I even count on? They didn't believe me. This case was taken up by the special services, who could not explain what happened and pinned all the murders on me, because as a child I was seen by a psychiatrist, so I'm crazy. That's crazy. Nonsense. Galachka, honey, I can see the disbelief in your eyes, but don't think. No, don't think that your mom went crazy and killed them all. No, no way. Do I look like the kind of person who would kill? Come here, give me a hug. You don't want to. Okay, I'm sorry. You're an idiot. All right, well, I'll continue. I was sent straight to prison, to a mental institution, where I've been until today. A long 12 years. I didn't talk to anyone. I pretended to be insane. I didn't take pills. But not too long ago, I decided to open up to a roommate who had schizophrenia. But for some reason I thought we were close. I told them all this. They started laughing, telling me I was crazy. Well, you can imagine me. I'm crazy. It's unthinkable. And then you know the rest. And that's how I ended up in this ward. Suddenly, there was a creaking sound in the hallway just outside the door. Miranda ran out to see who was there, but she didn't see anyone. Needed to leave before she got caught. She was taking too much risk, and that risk wasn't worth it. Without saying goodbye, John, she just walked out and down back to her watch, having previously walked around all wards. Miranda saw that Rick was awake and made him fall asleep, even though he resisted. Naughty child. All in a chair, she didn't notice as he lowered himself onto her eyelids and plunged her into serenity. Back at the hospital a day later, Miranda approached Lisa to find out more about the story. When she entered her office, she found the supervisor at work, but she graciously agreed to talk to her. Lisa once again put on a mask of kindness, concern, and a certain lightheartedness. "Hello, Miranda. What can I do for you?" She smiled slyly, but Miranda was too preoccupied with herself to pay attention. This is a patient in a private room. She appears to be schizophrenic. Schizophrenia wasn't the only thing on this poor woman's mind. I've been listening to what she's saying, and you know, there's a certain consistency to it. She's always talking about some expedition, scientists, some dark entities. Can you tell me her background? Briefly. That's odd. I've never heard her talk about anything like that. Usually she's just a bunch of ramblings that seem to make sense. Well, yes, indeed, she was on the expedition. She was the doctor in charge of the physical and mental condition of the expedition members. They went to Alaska to explore geology or something. But they set up camp right under a poisonous gas deposit that caused extreme hallucinations. Eventually, some members just disappeared and she went crazy and killed everyone who was there at the behest of God's voice. Sad story, but it couldn't be helped. They put her in the hospital, and she's been laid up here now. 12 years, and it's only gotten worse. She used to be able to talk normally. Miranda couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her mom's a crazy killer. Her mom. There's something Lisa's not telling us. Or is she? Thank you. That explains a lot. I won't bother you again. She was about to leave when suddenly, wait. Do I really have anything else to tell you? Yes. Nothing Alice didn't suspect. Why did you lie to me? She threw herself in her chair. I didn't lie to you. Fear tugged at her. Why didn't you tell me she could normally say anything she'd been pretending all along? Because it's not true. She can't talk normally. She can't. And my source says he heard you talking to her in person the night before last. Turns out she's your mom. Well, that's a twist. I thought we were in this together, Miranda, and you treat me like this. That's not nice. I'm gonna have to penalize you because you blew every chance you got. What did I give you? I'm sorry. She's guilty. She's got her head down. If she really believed those fairy tales. Black cloud of voices. Old man in the white room. Yes, I realize schizophrenics are very smooth. They say that then you can't keep track of it. You'll believe them yourself, and you'll be no different from them. But really, are you serious? Poor woman did not breathe gas, broke the vision, and did terrible things. Of course, the psyche can't take it. Displace the events and replace them with others, as in the case of the black cloud. I thought you were a bright girl, that you could see through emotions. What's going to happen now? Molubna looked Miranda over. That is no longer your concern. You are henceforth suspended from any obligations at this hospital until further discretion. I can't say it's been a pleasure doing business with you. You can go. She delved further into her paperwork. Walking down the corridor, Miranda took one last look at the post-changing patients around the ward. They weren't allowed to draw. There were no phones. The TV was only turned on in the evening books. They weren't allowed to sneak in. And the few that were in the ward were of such paltry varieties that even in such conditions no one was going to read them. All that was left was to just walk back and forth down the corridor. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Once a day, the nurses allowed those who wanted to clean the corridors to do so in exchange for 2 cigarettes. But it's strictly forbidden to smoke while taking such medication, Miranda thought. But no one here cared about that. Everyone smoked in the toilets, and all the employees didn't care. They even encouraged it. The toilets here were never closed so that the patients in there could not harm themselves. The protozoa and the inhabitants of the air were not there either, from which there was an unbearable stench throughout the ward, the epicenter of which were the toilet stalls, and it was goodbye to it all once and for all. What would happen to her mother, Joanna? She'd assumed the worst, but she couldn't be 100% sure. She couldn't be 100% sure of any of them. How do you feel about what she told her? Believe it, disbelieve it. Can you believe it? Can you not believe what your own mother says? And she had not even had time to say goodbye to her. For when Miranda now went into her room, Joanna and all her things were not there. Apparently, she'd been moved to another, stricter ward for the violent. And it was her own fault, going to talk to her. But how could she not after all these years apart? In any case, there is only what there is, which is nothing. There is nothing. No mom, no practices, no career, nothing. And all out of a simple accident of unfortunate coincidence. Miranda gathered her things, changed her clothes, and went home, where her father was already waiting for her, who had come to visit her since Miranda lived in the dormitory and hadn't seen him for a long time. He looked as usual, serene and aloof, like a piece of dough or plasticine that could be molded any way you wanted, given the right shape. For today, Miranda was in no mood to betray her father's line of behavior. So, as aloof and unconcerned as he was, he spoke to him. "How are you doing in practice?" he asked, when the roommates left the room, leaving her alone. "I got kicked out," she said, adjusting her textbooks on the table. "How?" he exclaimed, either surprise or not his emotional reaction. It was always difficult to understand since it was as if his face was behind dirty glass. "I didn't agree with the rules. The hospital opposed it. And we're all that sort of thing. You know, I think I'll tell you the truth, though. I saw my mom in there. She's been in there for over a decade. Did you know that?" His face changed a lot. He turned a little pale, and his eyes started to run around the room nervously. He looked like an anxious animal afraid of being caught by a wolf. "Miranda, dear, look, you knew about this." She looked at him coldly, looked him in the eye. He sighed heavily and sat down on her bed. Miranda towered like a mountain, standing in front of him. "Yes, I knew about it, but you understand me. How could I tell my own daughter that her beloved mother was lying in a mental dispensary? How could I? It would have been even more traumatic for you if you just thought she was missing. That way you'd have some hope that she was still alive. And then you'd just know that your mom went crazy. She's never coming back. What makes you think she's gone crazy? She probably told you the same story about the black clouds and the voices. I hope you realize that it's utter nonsense, and she just couldn't breathe the gases that destroyed her brain. I read about a gas deposit in Alaska, and there's no information. I didn't find anything about poisonous gas. It looks more like the dumbass operatives couldn't find an explanation for the unexplained, so they made up some gas and put the only surviving witness in a mental institution to discredit him and thus silence the truth. You know, a wise man once said that if you lock a perfectly healthy person in one room with a crazy person, the crazy person will not become healthy, but the healthy person would go crazy. Mental illness is an unstoppable force that crushes weak barriers in its path. Unfortunately, your psyche was that weakest barrier, and it was crushed. Your mother's frustrations, but I ask you not to give in to her provocations, and be strong. You should forget about her. You can't visit her anyway. I only got to visit her once when she went in there. And it was a sad experience, a very sore and sad experience. I never saw her again, and I wouldn't advise you to. I've already gotten over her loss. Now you need to get over it. You're crazy yourself. How could you forget your own wife, and then ask your daughter to forget her own mother? I never want to see you again. Get out of my sight." Miranda whispered pitifully. "Go away." She sobbed. There was nothing left for him to do. How to put up with Lifshitz again. Everything was on him. Give up and walk away defeated. Father was such an empty entity to Miranda that she even forgot his name sometimes. Joe, Jack John. She usually forgot his name when she became disillusioned with him. And now she'd forgotten it again. What was his name? Suddenly, the tears rolled from her eyes, streaming down her cheeks and falling onto her sneakers in the carpet, and the whole world collapsed before her eyes like a massive natural disaster, like an earthquake. Everything around her shook and seemed so shaky and fragile, like a crystal slipper that would shatter at the slightest pressure. Miranda was afraid to move because it seemed to her that this was the only way she could keep the balance of the world. Only in this way could she save it from imminent destruction. Dreadful thoughts like poison flooded her body, reaching her brain, beginning to destroy it from the inside out. Revenge. She was afraid to do anything about it. She was the only one who had found a soul close to her in life, the soul she had been searching for so long, the one she had lost to her childhood wounds. Revenge. There was no telling what would happen to her now. Her mom was taken from her without giving her the slightest opportunity to even enjoy her presence in her life. Revenge. She has to do something. Something to get back to the hospital somehow, to at least look at her from around the corner one more time. A few months passed. The early spring bright sun dazzled her eyes. There were no clouds in the sky. Hard work and hard work. Miranda managed to secure a second internship opportunity at the hospital. This time she was placed in the psychoethics ward, where she spent a few weeks looking for an opportunity to go to the hard ward and see her mom. This opportunity came to her when a patient from the severe ward was transferred to her ward. It was a severely depressed girl who had made a failed suicide attempt. According to the rules, all suicides were sent to the heavy ward first. There they were monitored. And if they were calm and complied with the rules, they were transferred to the psychoethical ward, where they were already receiving treatment. It was not particularly beautiful, but also far from scary girl. They had an ordinary appearance, bright red hair. She was slightly full of absorbent cotton and low, didn't socialize with anyone. She sat in her room all day and night, reading books, and only occasionally in the evening, she would get out to the restroom to change her reading location and somehow unwind. Psychosis about a boy, which occupied one large floor. There were both men and women. Since she was the only girl in the ward, everyone wanted to meet her, but guys weren't allowed to enter the women's floor. The only place they could meet was the dining hall. She had a strict diet and didn't eat the food in the canteen, only what her family brought her. Watching her for a couple days, Miranda finally pulled herself together and decided to approach her and talk to her. Starting with kind and open smiles, disposition and understanding, she soon settled down. Diana. That was the patient's name for herself, and struck up a dialogue. "Why did you try to kill yourself?" she asked when she sensed her interlocutor's disposition. "I was dumped by a guy who was the light of my life, and I thought that life without him had no meaning. Couldn't I have gotten his attention in a safer way?" Miranda tried to smile kindly. "What makes you think I wanted his attention? I was getting sick without him. He said he'd never come back to me. So I had no other choice. It's very sad." They were quiet for a while. "How was it for you in the heavy ward?" "You know, it was actually better than here. Nobody touched me. The ward manager made careful rounds every day and asked me how I was feeling. Changed medication adjustments. The crazies, as they are called, turned out to be friendly people. Yes, some were bowing, but at least there was no intrusiveness. Like here. And all dialogue was natural, in which both sides were interested. They knew how to listen there. The only downside is that there's not much to do there. But if it wasn't for that, I'd love to stay there. I also worked there a couple months ago. I was also interning there, and there was a patient there. I was wondering if you knew her. She had a low, gruff voice, healthy gray hair. She looked more like a man than a woman. She was about 50 years old. She was rambunctious, and they put her in a private room, the one that was chargeable. I don't know how you wouldn't happen to see one there now. And this is the one that had the lobotomy." Miranda's legs gave out. She collapsed to the floor. "Unfathomable. Unacceptable. Unavoidable. There's nothing wrong with you. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to shock you with the news. Were you?" And her close. "I'm sorry. I don't have to go." A thick morning fog descended on her mind. Many seemed to be mired in a web that pulled her back, preventing her from walking normally. At any moment she could have fallen, and the web would have dragged her back into the abyss, but she resisted and barely made it to her post. The chair was like a swamp mire that sucked anyone who dared to step on it into itself. Her ears were as if stuffed with absorbent cotton, from which only echoes of the surrounding sounds reached her consciousness. "And you're hard of hearing here," she thought. "Hey, hello." The screams grew louder and louder. Suddenly, the fog began to clear, and she saw Rick in front of her, looking at her haughtily and gloatingly with his childish eyes. "What are you doing here? The superintendent kicked you out, didn't she?" He smiled like a hurt child who had finally gotten his revenge. Miranda didn't answer, turning away and pretending he wasn't here. "I told you you wouldn't listen to me. You're going to laugh, make fun of me, then I'll just go and complain to the superintendent. I told you I did. It's your fault your mommy got that thing done. Whatever. Anyway, I told you. You little bastard. How dare you?" She screamed, standing up in front of him and starting to spit in his face. "Easy, easy, easy." "Miranda." A nurse came running up and quickly broke them up. This incident was decided to be put down and quickly quieted down so that no unnecessary noise would be raised. Miranda was given her first and last warning, and she vowed that it would not happen again. It had already decided how to proceed. But first she needs to see her mother, to see for the last time her eyes, and what was done to her. She must see, she must know, she must look at all things squarely. Once she got to the right floor of the other building, Miranda knocked on the door. For a while, no one opened it for her, but soon the door opened slightly and a nurse's head peeked out, asking what was going on. Miranda said that she had a private conversation with the superintendent, but they wouldn't just let her in because there was no warning about it. And to her great regret, she can't let a stranger in, even if he works here just in another building. Something had to be done, but nothing came to mind. There was nothing to do. She had to retreat. When she got back to her building, she went to the office of the head of the psychoromantic department to ask for his help. He was a young man of about 35 with a short haircut of light, full absorbent cotton, and with pleasant facial features. His voice was low velvety like an announcer's, and Miranda had liked him even the first time they met. His office was tidied, systematized, and neat, with no room for an assistant. There were also paintings hanging. Behind him hung a metaphysical portrait that appeared to have been painted by the same man who had done the portrait for Lisa. But this time the portrait turned out to be round from the wife's eyes, and without the slightest sharp angle, pleasant to the eye, and extremely aesthetically pleasing, as a small number of patterns repeated at least twice created a complete and finished composition with a pronounced meaning, which could be interpreted one way or another. Miranda sat down on the sofa in front of her and told her everything that was troubling her soul. She told about her mother, about her father, about being kicked out, about the head of the other department, and about the mentally retarded Rick, which had ruined her loved one. "Please, Liam, help me. Give me the chance to see my mom one last time. The only time I want to see her face and what was done to her. It's very important to me. I don't know what I can do to you for that, but I am willing to do anything if you would just make arrangements with her. Dear heartfelt Liam, your request is logical and justified. The only thing is, it violates the hospital's rules about visiting patients in the critically ill ward." But Miranda's eyes sparkled. "But I think I can think of something, because the case is extraordinary, and you deserve us to step into your shoes. We're not monsters after all. One visit's not gonna hurt the patient. Thank you very, very much." I ran out of the office with joy. She was working on an emotional high with a light hand. All the cases were nothing compared to the power she now possessed. Not even Rick had caused her such rejection, but she still hadn't forgotten what he had done. Couldn't forgive him, despite everything. But she was well aware of her global goal and the plans she'd come up with. A few days later, Miranda called Liam and informed her that she was allowed to meet her mother. Lisa protested strongly, but he managed to negotiate with the hospital authorities who pressed her. After getting to the right floor, she knocked on the door. She was opened by the same nurse who hadn't let her in a couple days ago. Miranda gave her a leering look and silently walked to the right room. The metal door opened with a creak. She saw the familiar interior of the place where everything had happened. The prison where her mother had been imprisoned. But where is she herself? There she was, sitting on the couch with her eyes closed. "Mom." Tanya answered only a murderous silence came to her hearing. In answer to her question, Miranda walked over and took her hand. The muscles were completely unstiffened. She could be manipulated like a puppet. A dent in the back of her head. God. No, what have they done? How could they? Mommy, talk to me. Please, say something. Don't be silent, she begged. I won't. Joanna's eyes closed, and she seemed to fall asleep for a moment. Then she woke up abruptly and started making incoherent noises. What have they done to you? How can this be tolerated in this country? How? Nothing. It's okay. Mommy, I'll let them go. They'll answer for what they did. They'll answer for everything. Just don't worry. When the fire starts, everything will be fine. I'll always be with you, just like you are with me. We'll always be together. Just don't worry. Tears of despair, hopelessness mixed with determination, willpower, and a desire for bloody, heartless, irrational desire for revenge. She knows what she has to do. Back at her dorm, she pulled out her stash with all the savings she'd made. There were a few 1,000s. She will have enough to make it worth it. Miranda painfully went to the gas station and bought a few dozen liters of gasoline and a lighter. How could this be smuggled into the hospital? Easy. After waiting for the day of her shift, she left the car, in the trunk of which all this gasoline was stored at the gate. At night, the nurses would lock the door, but she had the key, so waited until everyone was tired. She opened the door and stepped outside. The guard had long since fallen asleep in the booth. All she had to do was not to wake him. Hojali tried to open the door. No luck. It was locked. The guard must have the key somewhere. With quiet steps, she crept to his booth, opened the door, and saw the keys hanging on a nail. This is it. Just don't wake him up. Do it quietly, without stepping on the chip clip. She reached for the keys from the threshold, but accidentally stumbled back. A sharp sound, boards creaking, echoed throughout the booth. What? Who's there? The guard jumped up, but Miranda had time to hide behind the wall. He waited until he was asleep again. She reached for the keys again, and this time it was successful. Finding the right key, she locked the guard in his own booth and opened the gate. Not 10 minutes later, she dragged all the canisters to the entrance of the main building. Gasoline poured out onto. It dripped down the stairs, down the walls, and even sometimes from the ceiling. Gasoline was from everywhere. Every meter was at least somewhat flooded with gasoline. She poured gasoline on the grass, and on the street too, to make that one ignite too, making it difficult to get out of the main entrance. The lighter caught fire. A small flame developed in the wind. That small flame could do great destruction, and it did. The lighter fell to the ground. The gasoline immediately began to ignite in a chain wave. In a moment, the whole building was ablaze. The heating inside hadn't been turned off yet, so everything was burning perfectly. It didn't end there. Ran to the shed where the gardeners left their tools. She easily retrieved a metal rake from there. Once she got to the children's ward, she broke the bars on the window with difficulty and great effort, starting to scream and bang the ships on the iron. It woke up generally everyone inside, but the nurses and some of the children ran away at the noise. Run away from here. Run away from here. The gates are open. Can you run? Screaming at the top of her voice, she, trying to give them hope. The educated children started climbing out of the windows. Some ran to wake their comrades. The nurses tried to restrain them, but the stronger ones just pushed them away, and the old women fell to the floor. When they realized the hopelessness of their attempts, every child found themselves outside and, banding together, ran after Miranda toward the exit. The main building was already all ablaze. Crowds of employees and patients found themselves outside. Some climbed onto the roof. Some put bars on the windows and jumped from the second and third floors, breaking their legs. Hojali ran headlong and shouted to everyone that the exit was free. The crowds immediately rushed to the small gate, pushing each other. There was a crush, but no one was hurt. The guard tried unsuccessfully to break down the door. Then he grabbed a chair and broke the window, jumping out and trying to stop everyone. A wave of people just swept him out of the way. It was too late to do anything. You should have thought about safety earlier. Miranda didn't see her mother in the crowd and thought she could have accomplished her task. Her mom should have been suffocated by the smoke. That would be better for her, for Miranda thought death was better than such a miserable, insignificant life. John had lost the most important thing in her life, inner freedom. It was unlikely she would want to live with her own mind as a prisoner after such a thing. Or rather, what was left of it. Miranda didn't try to hide after committing her revenge. She simply went to her dormitory and fell into a peaceful, satisfied sleep. She was already taken to the station in the morning. 13 people died from the fire, and several dozen more had severe injuries. She was sentenced to the death penalty, which had not yet been abolished in their country at that time. The trial lasted several months, which was quick by the standards of the court. Committing a terrorist act and terrorist activity. That was her verdict. Joanna died in the fire from asphyxiation. Miranda's father contracted kidney disease from grief amidst severe stress, and died soon after. Rick, who was one of the perpetrators of the disaster, he had only a few severe burns on his hands, which healed after a couple of months, leaving only white spots on his swarthy skin. He had no regrets or guilt because it was physically impossible for him. But the stress did not go unnoticed by him, destroying his brain and increasing his dementia. For the rest of his life, he sat in his apartment under the care of relatives and a caregiver. Just before he died, Miranda thought again about everything he had done. The senselessness and stupidity of the deed with bloody sores came out on the body of her consciousness. All the patients in the hospital were soon caught and put back in. The condition of many only worsened after such a tragedy. What she was trying to accomplish with her act of protest, she had ruined not only her life, but also the lives of so many people. Tears of bitterness flowed from her eyes. But it was too late for regret. The depravity had only hit her body. A hellish pain that traveled from head to toe at the speed of light. Death.
Subscribe and click the bell.
It was early spring outside. The snow was just beginning to melt, but all the puddles were already in streams, around which the children were running merrily, shouting and laughing. They all had paper boats, and some were floating real wooden boats made by their fathers or grandfathers on the weekend. Near a large tree, from which large drops of melting snow were falling, stood a tall for her age girl of 8. She looked longingly in front of her. She didn't have a boat. Her mom was at work, so she couldn't make one, and the girl had no one else, not even friends. They had recently moved to a new house, and she hadn't had time to get to know anyone, but she loved to go out. But it's hard to have fun when everyone is playing and laughing, and no one wants you. Molly sighed and pouted her lips in resentment. On a bench a little away from the brooks and trees sat a short old man with gray tangled hair and a gray-brown cotton jacket. On his feet were very shabby boots that must have been cold. He looked at the children with a smile, then shifted his gaze to the girl and lowered his head sadly. After a few seconds, some idea came to the old man's mind. He jumped up from the bench and rushed somewhere towards the house. He knocked on the door, and a stout, tall woman with a ladle in her hands came out onto the porch. She asked the old man something menacingly, but when he explained what he wanted, she shook her head and went into the house. After a few seconds, she returned with a piece of paper. The old man nodded gratefully and returned to his bench. He began to roll the paper into the shape of a ship. He was doing it very strangely, in a special way, and even managed to attract the girl's attention. It should be recognized that this old man was one of those who, with his kindness and charm, could attract people to his side. He was helped by everyone to whom he turned for help, whether he managed to relieve them, or he could choose such people who would not refuse help. No one knew, but everyone helped, and he never refused if he was asked for anything. Christina, who lived in a house on the edge of the street, was an old and infirm old woman. She was so weak that sometimes she couldn't carry heavy bags home, but Gary, the old man, was always there to help. Christina often brought cutlets or soup to his semblance of a house in an abandoned school building. Molly watched the old man with interest as he rolled up the ship. When he finally finished, he smiled kindly at the girl and beckoned her over to him. Molly's mom was always telling her not to approach strangers because they could hurt her or take her away from her mom, and Molly had always obeyed her mother's instructions, but not now. The old man's good-natured smile, curiosity, and desire to play with everyone made her head for the bench. The old man silently handed the girl a small snow-white ship made of thick paper, almost cardboard. It was unusual, not like the others, big with sails and a mast. Molly did not know that such a thing could be made from an ordinary piece of paper. Her eyes lit up, and she looked at the old man as if he were the wizard Goodwin from the story she had read last weekend. The old man nodded at the creek, near where the children were playing, and smiled again. The smile lit up Molly's face, and she ran off to play with the others, as if this ship was a ticket to a world of friendship and children's games. Contrary to her wish, the girl did not put the ship on the water. She felt sorry for it. She ran with the boys, refused to exchange with the boys who offered their handicrafts. Molly had gotten attention and a willingness to play with her. She didn't need more. She turned to see that old man again, but he wasn't there. The bench was empty. Molly looked sadly at the ship and ran home. She would definitely keep it, no other way, because it was a gift from a real wizard. At home, Molly waited impatiently for her mother, who had to come from work in the evening, about 5 o'clock. The girl was so impatient to tell about the ship that she forgot to eat and did not even turn on her favorite cartoons, which went only on Saturdays and only at this time. She kept running to the window to see her mother's red coat or her blue beret, but her mother was delayed somewhere. When the clock hand went past 5, Molly began to worry. She would not leave the window. Tears almost came to her eyes. She remembered that Daddy had also failed to show up once, and she was afraid that it would happen again. But luckily, this time her fears were in vain. Molly's mom, Jennifer, came a half hour after the promised time. Molly threw herself on her neck, not even allowing her to put the bags on the floor and take off her shoes. "What's wrong?" Jennifer exclaimed. "I thought you weren't coming as Daddy." Almost sobbing, the girl said, "Sweetie." Jennifer hugged her daughter and squatted down. Molly, like most children, was often dramatic, but she was quite resilient. Her grudges for the rest of her life usually ended after a series of her favorite cartoons or after a scoop of ice cream bought especially for her. Now she wiped away her tears with her sleeve and smiled broadly. "Look what I have!" The girl shouted and ran off to her room. Jennifer smiled and shook her head, trying to get her boots off before her daughter arrived. Molly came running in just a few seconds later and held out a snow-white craft to her mother. Jennifer took it in her hands and bowed her head. She scrutinized it carefully and came across an embossed inscription. It was almost illegible, but there it was. The woman awed and backed away, not knowing what to say. "Honey, where did you get it?" Molly shrugged her shoulders. "The old man on the bench, he made it for me." "What did he look like?" Molly wondered. She wasn't good at describing people, so she could only name clothes. Jennifer handed her daughter the grocery bags and asked her to sort through them, and went to her room. She sat down tiredly on her bed and sighed. She couldn't believe her eyes and still thought she had imagined it. Jennifer reached into her locker and pulled out an old shoebox from there. She carefully removed the lid with trembling fingers and exhaled noisily. She hadn't had to open the cherished box in years. It was filled with junk, as anyone who opened a shoebox would say. But for Jennifer, it was the only thing that bound her to her quiet parents. Or rather, so she thought. Jennifer's mom, Susan, was indeed dead, having died of cancer when the girl was 13. Her father, on the other hand, had gone missing 3 years earlier. At 13, Jennifer was left alone, the benefit of being raised by an aunt, Jenna's father's sister. She was younger than her brother, unmarried, and belonged to the type of people who believed that nothing could be better than freedom. So she never restricted her niece in anything. However, her upbringing too, she was not engaged, preferring to write memoirs, go to modeling shoots, and celebrate contracts with her lovers, which were at least 6 for the time that Jennifer lived with her. Except only the last one had lingered for 2 years, along with her son Michael. Jenna had never treated her niece with warmth or anything like that. She just didn't care for the girl. Occasionally, she would walk into her room, look at Jennifer aloofly, nod her thoughts, and leave. At 18, she subtly began to hint that it was time for her niece to do the honors, or she would be too long in someone else's house. From then on, Jennifer started living on her own. She had been working part-time before, saving money for the future, and now she began to live on her own. 16 years ago, a 13-year-old girl sat on a narrow bed with flowered sheets. She was holding a ship made of paper. It had masts and sails and did not look at all like the ones children played with on the street. She looked sadly at the ship, her hand trembling. "What are you doing with this toy? You are not 5 years old." Rolling her eyes, asked Jenna, who leaned against the door and looked at her niece. She was a tall and thin woman with long curly hair and a very pretty face. The woman preferred to wear expensive brand-name clothes and put on good makeup. Jennifer, as a child, often heard from her mother that it was unknown where she got the money for all this from. She never had a normal job, occasionally selling her graphomaniacal writings to publishers and receiving modest money for photo shoots as a model. "My dad made me this." Coping with her emotions, the girl replied and hid the ship in a small shoebox that stood next to her. When the lid was in place, Jennifer clutched the box to her chest. "Your father hasn't been with you for 3 years now. There's no telling where he is." Jenna shrugged her shoulders. "It's about time you started living your own life. Even though your mother, it didn't work out." Jennifer looked at her aunt with hatred and clenched her teeth. A storm of emotions rose at her because of mentioning her mother in such a negative way. The girl realized that she shouldn't quarrel with her aunt, with whom she would have to live for a long time, but she wasn't going to listen to such statements about her mother. "This is the memory of him. Only he made ships like this. I know, because no one else had them. He'd leave his signature by crumpling the sheet in a special way. Would you like me to show you?" Jenna raised her hands, shook her head, dismissed me from looking at the old paper. John was always scribbling something when he had nothing to do and sticking it to others. The look Jennifer directed at her aunt startled the woman. She chose to remove herself from the small room, leaving the girl alone with her thoughts. There could be no mistake. It was indeed the same ship. The side was crumpled and stamped with the same illegible letters as on the old yellowed piece of paper. Jennifer folded the 2 ships and closed her eyes. "What if I'm just making this up to myself?" The woman shook her head. For over 19 years, nothing had been heard from her father. It was as if he had fallen through the earth, and now, after all this time, Jennifer was seeing the same ship. What if it was just a coincidence? But Jennifer didn't believe in coincidence. She believed in fate. Maybe it was her desire to have at least one loving relative, except for her daughter, of course. But she was too young to confide her worries to her. Jennifer had never been an optimist, quite the opposite. Life didn't give her moments to believe in miracles or happy endings. First, her father disappeared, then her mother died, and she was taken in by a self-obsessed aunt. At 19, it seemed that life was finally starting to get better when a young girl was in law school. She got a boyfriend, and they started living together. Then it seemed that everything would always be fine. But fate, or evil doom, never left Jennifer, only gave her a little respite. And now, years later, in her life again happened grief, the usual familiar grief. The woman was glad she had her daughter, but she was very afraid for her. Molly, in essence, was all Jennifer had left, and the tiny chance that her father was still alive had lit a long-lost hope in Jennifer's long-lost soul into a faint flame. "Molly?" shouted the woman, removing the box. She had never shown it to anyone, ever. after that day at Jenna's house. It seemed to be something private and intimate, something to be hidden and not given to anyone. "Honey, come here." Molly ran into the room, her face smeared with flour, certainly not escaping her mother's scrutinizing gaze. Jennifer looked at her daughter with that maternal look that made it impossible to lie. Lowering her eyes, Molly confessed, "I dropped the flour." "The whole packet?" Jennifer gasped, remembering that she had wanted to make cheesecakes this morning. "Why'd you get soaked?" "I thought I could clean it up before you got home." "Kids," the mother thought and shook her head. For a second, the heavy thoughts disappeared from her head, and she looked at her daughter with a smile. Molly was the only ray of light in her life, and she wasn't ready to lose it either. "Okay, let's deal with the flour. You better tell me, where was that old man who made you the boat?" Molly sighed and tried to explain the place. Jennifer had grown up in this town, so she knew the streets and nooks and crannies well, but even she had a hard time understanding the place from her daughter's clumsy and somewhat awkward description. "The garages next to the mini village?" Jennifer shrieked when she finally realized. Molly shrugged. "If that's not them, I've completely forgotten the town." Molly didn't understand half of what her mother was saying, so she just nodded and pulled her by the hand into the kitchen. "Come on, I'm hungry." "Oh, you've been hungry all day. Will you have rice and a cutlet?" The girl nodded and rushed into the kitchen. "But let's get the flour out of the way first." Jennifer grinned. A heavy sigh sounded on the cool spring street, close to a small settlement. Or rather, it was not really a settlement, but a part of the city where private houses were preserved when the center and most of the districts were given for the construction of high-rise buildings. The inhabitants of this part of the city refused, and there remained a settlement of private houses. It was very small, but because of the heavy traffic and the large amount of trees, it was frequented by teenagers in the evenings and children during the day. Jennifer had no idea how her 8-year-old daughter had found the settlement when it was quite a long way from their apartment. The place greeted the woman with familiar fresh air and a view that hadn't changed at all. It was worth saying in the 10 years she had been out of town, the township hadn't changed the most. If in the city there were new stores, buildings, schools, and kindergartens, here stood the old grocery store, where probably still worked a tall, full Clara, who never tied her blue apron. Jennifer and her friends often ran behind the garages or sat on the village's shriveled playground. Besides, there were a lot of abandoned houses here, just a teenager's paradise. There were streams and puddles everywhere, but Jennifer remembered the way to the garages. She knew she wasn't likely to find anything there, but it was worth a try. Then she intended to ask around. In a place like this, everyone knew each other. "Really?" Jennifer grinned. The garages hadn't changed at all, except a little more dreary than they had been 10 years ago, and they were still standing close together. There was a path in the middle that teenagers ran around on, and one garage had an old 9-wheeler on it. No one knew how it had gotten there, but it had been there since before Jennifer had moved in with her aunt. Out of the corner of her eye, Jennifer could see the bench where the old man was sitting, according to Molly's stories, and in the distance there was an old oak tree, its branches spreading out for many meters, where the girl was standing. Jennifer looked around more carefully, hoping to find some hint of the old man who had made the boat. "Girl, you shouldn't stand where cars drive." A loud, very sonorous male voice sounded behind her. Jennifer turned indignantly toward the man and opened her mouth to say what she thought, but she failed. "Michael, you?" "How?" Standing in front of the woman was her longtime and not the most pleasant acquaintance. He could be categorized as the type of memory you don't really want to remember. Tall, blonde, and very pompous. Oh gods, how much Jennifer wanted him gone, gone like her father had once been, without a trace. It had been her ultimate dream at 16. To meet him now was a complete surprise to the thoughtful woman. I live here, but how did you end up here? That's the question. The man grinned. Michael was a year older than Jennifer, but had been in the same grade as her because of his father's many moves. He was in the military. A year after Susan, Jennifer's mom died, Jenna had gotten together with Michael's dad, and the boy had moved in with them. Or rather, he moved in with Jennifer, because he lived the next 2.5 years with her in the same room. It had been a bloody, awful 2.5 years. Jennifer preferred never to remember them. 13 years ago, a tall, blonde-haired guy flies into the room and throws his backpack right on the floor. It's light, hardly any textbooks in it, but it hits the leg of a girl who's sitting at her desk trying to do her homework. It's worth saying, Jennifer has always studied hard, tried to get good grades, but lately because of having a named roommate, she moved out to study, so she had to do her homework when no one was in the apartment. Michael liked to hang out after school with his buddies. How many times do I have to ask you not to throw things in the room? The girl asked angrily, not turning around. She had already started looking for her old headphones to isolate herself from Michael's chatter. Yes, it was his favorite thing to do, talking while Jennifer was doing her homework. He pissed her off all the time. This is my room, too, prickle, and you need to stop worrying about order like this apartment is yours. Jennifer couldn't take it anymore and turned to face the guy. You know, no matter where you are, throwing things on the floor, talking loudly all night, is unacceptable anywhere. Michael grinned and tossed a tattered tennis ball from one hand to the other. You're too right, petite. We're 9 months apart. The girl mouthed offensively and went back to her algebra homework. The headphones were finally plugged in, and Jennifer could no longer hear Michael's annoying, mosquito-like voice. Not long after that day, Jennifer lost her headphones. More correctly, they were ruined by Michael, who was tired of the girl ignoring his words. Jennifer even cried then. And now, many years later, Jennifer stood in the garages and looked at that same annoying and nasty face. Of course, they weren't children anymore, and Jennifer had long since become a mother herself, but childhood resentments don't just go away. That made her feel a kind of nasty suffocation on her soul, as if an encounter had occurred that she didn't want. In spite of her feelings, however, Jennifer smiled. I recently moved here. Michael shifted his gloves into another pocket and grinned. I thought you had an apartment downtown, didn't you? I sold it. Jennifer replied briefly, and no, I don't want to talk about what happened. The man grinned, the familiar dimples appearing on his face. He was standing quite far away, but even from that distance Jennifer could see the familiar light in his eyes. Do you want to come in? I don't live far from here. Michael asked, or do you have something to do? Next time I will, but now I have 44 minutes left before my shift starts, and I have to find the homeless man the 8-year-old kid described. Michael's eyes widened as he looked at the woman in surprise and grinned again. He didn't seem to understand anything, but he was insanely curious. Who was the homeless guy? Jennifer didn't know if she should answer Michael, because she never liked him and only did nasty things to him, but she judiciously described the situation briefly. She was moved to this act by the realization that without the help of a local, to find the old man will be very difficult. Besides, Michael, like her, was an adult. It's foolish to lose a chance to find a possible father because of childhood resentments. So you're looking for the man who made your daughter's boat. I won't ask why, but I can't help you yet. I just bought a garage here, so I don't know anything or anybody. but I'll be sure to ask around and see if anyone knows anything." Jennifer nodded gratefully. She hadn't expected to be so lucky. It was the first time fate had taken pity on her, it seemed. Considering it was Michael, though. "Give me the number?" said Michael, and Jennifer looked at him uncomprehendingly. "I'll call you if I can find it, or do you want me to pigeonhole you?" "No," said a hurt Jennifer. There he was, the real Michael, sarcastic and sarcastic. Too bad. The man smiled wryly. "In that case, I would have had to get your address." Jennifer held back the urge to reply and handed Michael a business card. He took it and whistled. "Juvenile Inspector, Senior Lieutenant Jones Jennifer. Not bad. I never thought you'd be on the police force. I was a specialist in another field, and they only took me here to educate kids. I never thought I'd be doing that. I didn't see myself as a school teacher either." The man laughed and punched the number into his phone. Jennifer opened her eyes wide and gasped. "What? No way? You were dumb as a cork. How could you be?" Michael rolled his eyes and shook his head. "It's been 13 years and you're still as cocky and self-important as ever." "Who's to say? Okay, well, if you hear anything, give me a call." Jennifer said hurriedly and left. She didn't say goodbye or anything. The thoughts and feelings of her childhood came flooding back. Yes, someone will probably say that it is strange. They are almost 30 years old. What childhood resentments? But for Jennifer, immersed in her own problems, after the death of her mother and the disappearance of her father, it was the last straw. A spitting aunt, a strange man in the apartment, and him, the man who occupied the girl's room and made her worry almost every day. Because of him, she almost lost her gold medal and had a fight with her aunt, so much so that she threatened to get rid of her niece. It wasn't just a childish grudge, it was something you can't forget. "Baby, stay with Aunt Nancy. She'll look after you." Jennifer whispered softly in her daughter's ear, "But where are you going so late?" Jennifer sighed. She couldn't tell her daughter the truth while it was still early. "To work. I got called into work." Molly nodded and hugged her mother. "Nancy, I'll pick her up in the morning then so I don't wake you up if anything happens, okay?" The tall, thin woman, Jennifer's neighbor, nodded. It wasn't the first time she had stayed with a girl whose mother worked all the time. Raising a child alone, there are a lot of downsides. Jennifer left Nancy's apartment and went about her business. She got into the old car that once belonged to her husband and drove off. At 12:30 at night, the phone rang. On the other side was the slightly agitated voice of a man asking for an urgent call to the abandoned school building. It was Michael. Oh gods! How Jennifer was angry. She just didn't understand what he wanted from her at almost midnight, but he was asking to come urgently, so she sent her daughter to a neighbor's house and went to the school building herself. She'd have to remember where it was. Night roads were a nightmare for the woman. She hated going anywhere in the dark. The fear that still lingered constantly plagued her, but the strange joking messages that came from Michael kept Jennifer going. She just wanted to remember a couple of skills from her self-defense classes and smash his smug nose in for upsetting her daughter and making Jennifer herself drive off halfway through the night, unknowingly to wherever. How angry she was, but there was nothing she could do but clutch the steering wheel with all her might and rid the dumb jokes and the messages from Michael out of the corner of her eye. Jennifer wouldn't be surprised if she arrived at the school building and he was waiting for her with a smile on his face and said he was just bored. The car had to be parked far away from her destination, simply for the reason that the woman didn't know what kind of soil was there. Considering it was spring, there could be both snow and knee-deep water, and that was a best-case scenario. Jennifer climbed out of the car and turned on her flashlight, a good thing she had known to grab one before she left. Trying to remember the way to the abandoned school, she trudged through the mud and snow. Good thing she'd worn shoes that wouldn't get wet. Despite her excellent grades, Jennifer always liked to have fun with her friends. She never lagged behind her girlfriends in relationships, also ran behind the garages, and came home after midnight, drunk. True, it was once or twice. No more. The aunt was to blame. While the other girls sprayed a ton of perfume on themselves and chewed a whole pack of mint gum to cover up the smell of cigarettes and booze, Jennifer had no reason to do that. Jenna didn't care about her. She was immersed in herself and her memoirs. Jennifer wanted to listen to moralizing like the rest of them, wanted to hide the smell and try to get out of the house after midnight, but she couldn't. Jenna herself sometimes asked her why Jennifer didn't drink, invited the Beaumont to her parties, and sometimes suggested her acquaintances as suitors. Because of this, Jennifer would often leave the house or sit with her headphones on. At that time, she and her friends would raid every abandoned house in the neighborhood. Of course, the huge school building didn't go unnoticed. Jennifer's memory did not fail her, and she recognized the exact location of the school. It was a huge, sometimes crumbling building, where once they wanted to make a factory, then a sewing shop, and then they gave up. 10 years ago, the building had been a wreck, and now it seemed to be hanging on by a thread. Jennifer sighed and walked inside. She still couldn't figure out what Michael was doing in this place and why he wanted Jennifer. Once inside, the woman heard the annoying creaking sound the wooden floor made. It was like a sieve, so badly gnawed by mice. There was trash, cigarette butts, and bottles lying everywhere. Jennifer pulled out her cell phone and asked Michael where he was. In response, from somewhere overhead, Michael dedicated the phone. "Tell me why you pulled me out of bed in. Michael? Michael?" Jennifer broke into a run, but the man's warning shout stopped her. Michael was hanging from a hole in the floor on the second floor. Apparently, he had fallen through it. He somehow kept his balance and even managed to hold his phone. The floor is very flimsy. You climb up, you could fall through it yourself. Michael explained, dedicating himself to the floor. Jennifer nodded. She was well aware of that herself. "Why didn't you call the emergency services? You figured that since you got me in here, you'd be the one to get me out." An exasperated sigh echoed throughout the building. "The guys told me about a local homeless guy who lives at the school. They say he walks around, helps everyone, and they give him food and clothes. Are you sure it's him?" Jennifer asked excitedly, and then hesitated. "Okay, I get it. We'll talk about it later. For now, we need to figure out how to get you out. Maybe the emergency services?" Michael didn't have time to answer. The board beneath him began to make a sickening creaking sound. Sure, the height wasn't very high. He'd probably survived the fall, but it wasn't just the height. The first floor was full of beams, metal objects, and such. He fell on them. No ambulance would help. Jennifer awed and threw herself up the stairs. For a second, she was seized by memories she would rather not remember. Of that very day. She couldn't hear Michael screaming. She could only hear the damn boards that were creaking, crunching, and generally making too many noises that just kept the woman from concentrating. She realized the rescue service wasn't going to make it in time. Remembering the lessons of rescuing drowning people, Jennifer flopped to the floor as soon as she heard a creak beneath her. She prayed to God that she wouldn't fall. An image of a daughter who might be alone came to mind, but then another, darker and gloomier Jennifer crawled harder. Carefully pulling off her belt, Jennifer tossed one end to Michael. He tossed his phone back to the ladder and picked up the end of the belt. Jennifer grabbed some kind of beam with her other hand and began to pull. "Don't fly off after me," Michael warned. "I'm not going to." Jennifer parried and pulled again. Michael began to crawl out of the hole, but it was eerily slow, and the floor beneath them buckled harder and harder. The man was apparently stuck, thanks to the thick jacket that helped him not fall, but it was also preventing him from getting out. Jennifer still managed to pull Michael out of his trap. She was sweating and her arm was aching as the floor beneath the man. He slowly crawled towards the flimsy staircase. Jennifer descended to the first floor and sighed, shaking off her clothes and stretching her jacket. "You're insane," Michael pronounced and leaned against the wall. When one frame last year caught, their pirouettes had to do more pirouettes. The woman grinned. A second after she said that, a beam fell a couple of centimeters from where Michael was, fell to the first floor, and broke in two with a crash, and both Jennifer and Michael stood with their eyes wide open. "About time," Michael said and exhaled. "It could have been me." The angry look the woman threw at the boy was unmatched. For a second, it seemed that Michael would have chosen to go back. "Why did you call me instead of the emergency services? Are you sick of living, you idiot? Are you out of your mind?" shouted Jennifer, approaching the man. "You're an idiot and a moron. Are you scared for me?" Michael asked incredulously. Jennifer was half silent and leaned against the icy stone wall, tears coming to her eyes. But she held back as she always did. "I'm losing everyone," she answered hoarsely, "and lately it seems like it's my curse. I've lost my mother, my father, my husband. I buried my mother not in front of my children as a grown woman, but when I was 13. I didn't understand what had happened or how it was possible. My father had left my life even earlier, starting a series of these events. I was 10. I didn't even have time to memorize what he looked like. If it wasn't for pictures, I wouldn't have known. And I buried my husband, being not a gray-haired old lady and with hands trembling from old age, but with a child in my arms, with a 7-year-old girl who to this day does not understand why Daddy left her. And Daddy, at the last second of his life, called me, not the emergency services, not the ambulance, but me." A single traitorous tear rolled out of Jennifer's eye, but she brushed it away so quickly that Michael didn't notice. He'd been in an accident. The car had flipped over, warped. It was impossible to get out from inside. He realized this, so he called me and apologized for everything. I was at work and I was interviewing a witness. I was angry that he interrupted me. Then I got a voicemail from him and I wanted to open it, but I got a call from the ambulance. He was driving in the dark late at night and he sent a video of him saying goodbye to his daughter. Jennifer covered her face with her hands and breathed heavily. She couldn't understand why she was saying all this, especially since Michael, truth be told, didn't really care who to tell anymore. In the 8 months that Mason had been gone, Jennifer had never, ever told anyone about her pain. "That's why I was scared for you, because I won't suffer another death, much less one caused by me." Michael put his hand on Jennifer's shoulder. "I'm sorry, I really am. It was stupid, coming here alone, calling you and..." Jennifer raised her eyes to the man and shook her head. "I'm just glad you're alive. I'm glad everything turned out okay." "Wait." Jennifer's discerning gaze noticed movement in the darkness. It was as if someone was standing there listening. The woman snatched the flashlight from Michael's hands and pointed it into the darkness. A short man with a beard and mustache, wearing an old hat, a fleece jacket, and old boots was looking at her. Jennifer recognized him, just as Molly had described him. "Dad?" About her father, Jennifer didn't remember much. He was short, shorter than Susan, and even shorter than Jenna. Dad had a tattoo on his forearm and a large scar behind his ear. Jennifer didn't know where he was from, but she remembered her father telling more and more stories about his origins. At first she had believed, eventually she realized she was being lied to. Now an old man with gray hair, a sad, frightened look stood in front of Jennifer, and she couldn't understand at all. Was this her father or not? She took a step forward, but Michael grabbed her arm. "Father, what are you talking about?" Jennifer waved the man away and walked toward the old man with slow and cautious steps. She was afraid of scaring him. "Good evening. My name is Jennifer. And you are?" The old man smiled, revealing yellow teeth. "They call me Gary. Your father's name was John, wasn't it?" Michael asked with his usual sneer. Jennifer rolled her eyes and chose not to answer. "Don't you recognize me?" "I realize it's been 19 years, but 19?" the old man asked. "So I only remember those years. I didn't count, of course, but about 20 years ago, I woke up in another city in the snow. I didn't remember anything." Gary lowered his head and began to speak hoarsely, as if remembering something he disliked very much. Jennifer listened intently, trying to look at the unfamiliar features of his face. "I lived there for a few years, and then I came to this wonderful town by chance. The people here are very kind, not unlike the people in the place where I woke up. They feed me, sing to me, even give me clothes, and it's not a bad place to live. It's chilly in winter, of course, but I've gotten used to it." Shocked at the face and total incomprehension, Jennifer looked at the old man in front of her. She listened to him and she was getting scared. It was as if what he was telling her had happened to her personally. It was so horrible that she took a few slow steps back and leaned against the wall again. Michael touched her shoulder again and nodded, letting her know he was close by. "So you don't remember anything that happened before you woke up in that town?" asked Michael, giving Jennifer time to take a breath. The old man shook his head. "Do you have a tattoo of a ship on your forearm?" Jennifer asked. Gary blurted out a smile as he looked at the girl and rolled up the sleeve of the jacket that was wide to him. "Here it is, right here. Ships, you know, I've always liked them. They're beautiful, you have to admit. It's a pity we don't have a sea to look at this splendor." The air stuck in Jennifer's lungs and wouldn't come out. She looked helplessly at Michael and nodded. The man looked at the old man strangely. There was distrust and suspicion in his gaze. "And the crescent-shaped scar behind his ear?" Gary shrugged. "I haven't had to look in a mirror in 20 years, ma'am." The old man smacked his lips. Michael approached him and asked him to take off his hat. Behind his ear, there was indeed a big, thick scar like a crescent moon. The man turned to Jennifer and nodded. She couldn't hold back a sigh. Her knees shook so hard it felt like the ground was about to go out from under her feet, and her hands couldn't grasp the phone in her pocket. Someone had texted, however. It didn't care at all right now. Jennifer reached in and pulled out her phone, and from under the case she pulled out an old, tattered picture of her father and mother. They were smiling happily together and looking at the camera. Carefully, Jennifer held out the photo to Michael, who showed it to the old man, dedicating it with a flashlight. "Do you recognize it?" Gary, as usual, shrugged his shoulders. "Not the man, but the woman, she's beautiful. I think I've even dreamed about her sometimes." "Yeah, that's her. I couldn't figure out where I'd seen her, but she comes to me often, talking heresy. No wonder. The cold makes you dream." This is a picture of my parents, Susan and John. 19 years ago, my father went missing. He was short with a tattoo of a ship on his forearm and a scar behind his ear. He made paper ships and gave them away like you gave my daughter's ship. The old man listened to Jennifer in silence, not daring to speak a word against it. On his wrinkled and overgrown face, there was a storm of emotions, from fright to hope. It seemed that he was about to cry. "Do you think I am your father, ma'am?" "Yes," Jennifer answered clearly. "Why didn't you say you were looking for your father?" Michael hissed almost in Jennifer's face. They had talked Gary, or John, into having Michael over to their house for the night and then going to the hospital the next day. Admittedly, it wasn't an option that Michael liked very much, his apartment having been turned into a bed and breakfast. "I wasn't sure." Jennifer shrugged and walked over to the sink to pour water. "I couldn't tell you that maybe my dad was a homeless guy who gave the kids paper boats. I thought I was crazy, and besides, you're not the one to tell. Is it okay to bring him to my house? First of all, you suggested it. Second of all, it's not okay to bring him to my house. Molly would come over in the morning and find a homeless guy smelling like garbage on the couch." Michael nodded. "Okay, Jennifer, I get it. I have a former neurologist who works at Central Hospital. I'll call in the morning and see what can be done." "Yeah, well, you call me. I'll try to get there early." There was a loud sigh. Michael rolled his eyes expressively. "Where are you going at 2:00 in the morning?" "Stay. I've got a great bed and a folding chair. You don't have the girl alone, do you?" Jennifer nodded her head. She was very tired and did not even try to refuse Michael's offer. In the few hours she had spent in the place, the hatred and bad memories had faded away somewhere. Maybe it was due to fatigue, or maybe Jennifer finally realized that they were no longer children. Despite the tiredness and even detachment, neither Jennifer nor Michael wanted to sleep. The man made the bed and laid out the couch. At first he tried to walk quietly around his own apartment, but then he realized that Gary was very difficult to wake. It wasn't that surprising, though. He slept in an abandoned building next door to alcoholics. They hardly behaved quietly at night. Jennifer made tea for two. The man came in and plopped tiredly on a bar stool. "So what? Why that doctor, the ex?" Jennifer smiled and sipped her green tea. It should be made clear that Jennifer liked to get off topic with herself. She hated being the center of attention, the reason being that she was afraid. Being always in her aunt's house, more of an appendix to the apartment than a member of it, Jennifer transferred this behavior to the rest of her life. She had almost no friends. Those couple of colleagues from work and former classmates stayed in the neighboring town, where the woman lived for the last 10 years. She didn't make any acquaintances in the new city, and admittedly, she didn't want to. So, for example, with Nancy, Jennifer met by accident, having mixed up the doors of the apartment. In the house where Molly and Jennifer live, not all apartments have a number, because the house was not built so long ago, and not even all the apartments have not yet sold. Those who have already settled in have put numbers on their doors, but Jennifer and Nancy, who have just moved in, have not had time to do so. Late at night, after socializing with one not very polite teenager who had been drinking, Jennifer was coming home and got the wrong apartment door. She banged on Nancy's door for 20 minutes before she called the police. It took the precinct officer a long time to sort out what had happened. Michael grinned and shook his head. Jennifer noticed that he was doing that a little too often lately. "Do you care about that?" Jennifer shrugged and took another sip of her tea. It was hot and flowed pleasantly through her body. Only now it was clear how tired, cold, and scared she was. It was a bad match. Jennifer laughed. "Who better than me to know that it's almost impossible to get along with you?" Michael smiled. But that phrase is almost always an excuse. So what happened? Did you cheat on her? No, of course not. The man brushed it off. It's just that she wanted children. All her life she dreamed of a lavish wedding and a family, and I was 22. I'd just gotten back from the army and admittedly wasn't going to have kids for the next couple of years. Of course, we tried to live together, to stop fighting, but in the end she left. Michael smiled sadly and sipped his tea. No sugar. Remember, it felt good. It's hard to forget, I used to run into the kitchen and make you tea 5 times a day because you were lazy. Maybe I liked you taking care of me. No, you just liked messing with me. Jennifer grinned, leaning back against the wall. While Michael was gone, she had time to look around the apartment a little and was generally surprised. Despite the outside clutter, it was clean. The one-bedroom apartment resembled the one Jennifer had lived in with Jenna. A large room, a living room, and a small bedroom. The kitchen was surprisingly done up in very nice modern colors, with a tall table and a few bar stools. It wasn't hard to tell that the man lived here alone, though. There was one pan on the stove, one plate and fork in the sink, and one cup on the countertop. Jennifer had to work hard to find the other cup. So what's your ex-girlfriend's name? I figured you just don't want to talk about your dad, right? Okay, I'll play along. Her name was Mary, and it is. She's a lovely girl, a great neurologist, and probably a good wife, and she's also a mother. She had a son a few years ago, and surprisingly, I became his godfather. No way! I always thought it was hard to keep good relationships with exes. How would I know, though? My husband was my only partner, and he died. How tragic and pathetic. He died and I stayed. It's weird to start a new one. Do you have someone in mind? Isn't there a young English teacher in the school? Michael grimaced. Wendy? She's still working. Jennifer stepped forward and opened her eyes in surprise. No way. She's 90? 82 turned 82 at the beginning of the year. Gods, she's still telling stories about what it was like in England in '56. Jennifer couldn't stop laughing. It seemed like someone had jammed the on button. I can't understand how you got to school. Laughing back, Jennifer said, I could never associate you with a teacher. Other than a felon, did you ever associate me with anyone at all? With a smile at the corner of his lips, Michael asked. The silence was more eloquent than any phrase. Jennifer had never really seen Michael as a good person, never thought he would become anything more than a class bully. There was a time when there was no work at all. His father had finally drank himself into oblivion, started to lose his mind. Yes, Michael was shifting a mug of tea from hand to hand. There was nothing to live on, and my neighbor worked at the school as a vice principal. She retroactively enrolled me in some pedagogical courses, and in September, she got me a job as a teacher. Hodabik had just retired. They called Hodabich an old history teacher who wore a long beard and was bald. Surprisingly, I liked it. The salary, of course, is not great, but you can live. I graduated as a history teacher, and now I have 2 jobs and classroom management. Jennifer and Michael talked a little more about other things, about work, family, and the past, though they mentioned the past only in passing, trying not to talk about how they felt about each other. Jennifer, for the first time in years, closed the gestalt of resentment over what she thought was a spoiled childhood. Thank you. The woman said as she and Michael went to bed. The man gave her a perplexed look for keeping the conversation going and keeping me out of it. He didn't let me think about what was going on with me and my father. You're welcome. Michael replied simply and succinctly. I've always done that. I'm not used to it. What are you talking about? Jennifer asked, confused. When we lived at Aunt Jenna's house, it happened a lot. She'd say something to you, and you'd get caught up in the words, the thoughts. It was obvious you couldn't handle the flow of thoughts and nonsense in your head. Is that why you were talking nonsense? Were you just trying to distract me from thinking? Michael shrugged. Sometimes I just like to piss you off. He said and went into the bedroom, where he went to sleep in a small and hardly comfortable chair, leaving Jennifer alone with her thoughts. She couldn't believe it. She was really stuck on what she had been told. Jennifer spent long periods of time thinking about problems and solutions, and was aware of the problem, but she could never think that Michael noticed it. However, they had lived in the same room for several years. It would be strange not to notice it. We'll have to do a lot of tests, of course, MRIs, blood tests, and so on. Plus, it's important to get him at least out of the state he's in right now. Nervously, Mary turned around to the door of room number 8, where Gary was lying. Since he doesn't have any identification, my hands are tied. If the story Michael told me is true, you should start recovering your papers immediately so we can begin treatment. Mary was a petite blonde with square glasses, a round face, and dimpled cheeks. She smiled at everyone and was polite, also very excited about Michael's arrival. She seemed to really care for him. Only Jennifer couldn't tell in what way she cared for him. Thank you, Mary. But if he hasn't had memories for 20 years, can they come back? Mary put her head down into the clipboard. 20 years is a long time, very long. Usually patients recover quickly with care, but your father has signs of frostbite, signs of beatings. He also drank and probably smoked, and he ate leftovers, which obviously didn't improve the situation. Also, for memories to come back, you need familiar surroundings, familiar people, and he was living in an abandoned school, and hardly anyone was trying to help him. I can't say for sure, but the chances are slim to none. We'll do what we can, but I can't promise anything, especially not until he has an ID. Jennifer covered her face with her hand and shook her head. She didn't know what to do or how to be. The situation was getting worse and worse by the second. Thank you, Mary. Michael smiled and walked away with Mary. When he returned, Jennifer looked sadly at the room where her father was lying. The orderlies had shaved him and cleaned him up. Jennifer had brought new clothes. Now the woman was sure that this old man, her father, was short with blue eyes, a scar, and a tattoo. She had found him, except he didn't remember anything, and it was awful. Jennifer, I've been thinking about the files. We can't recover them yet. Jennifer said with a heavy heart. Her words were soaked with grief and heaviness. Dad had a business, an apartment, money, and he'd disappeared too suddenly, and he was in a foreign city. Mom had said he was away on a business trip when he disappeared. He flew away, but he couldn't come back, and I think there's a reason for that. He's clearly been helped to forget his life. If we recover the documents and his status, those involved will probably be very unhappy. Michael nodded tiredly and leaned against the cold wall, adjusting the white robe draped over his shoulders. It's been 20 years. Do you really think anyone still cares? I've been a police officer for 7 years, and I've seen so much brutality. People are sometimes willing to remember things that happened decades ago, and if it involves money, they never forget. Yeah, I get it. Then you and I need to find out who's responsible for what happened as soon as possible. Otherwise, we won't be able to cure your father. Thank you for helping me and not going against my better judgment. You're welcome. Michael chuckled. I've never been against you. Immediately, memories of 12 years ago came to his mind. What made you think you could yell at her? What makes you think she's to blame for your troubles? Shouted Michael in the face of Jenna, who stood nonchalantly with a glass of wine in the kitchen and slowly chewed expensive cheese. She's already lived here longer than I thought she would, so she can't live on my money. It's hard work. She doesn't realize that. Really? And what kind of labor do you do? Michael asked snidely, squinting his eyes. Do you type a sentence a day? Or maybe you sleep with another man? Why are you looking at me like that? I know about your lovers and that you're cheating on my father. So go and tell him, whispered Jenna. You can't. Maybe because your daddy is an alcoholic and he's about to be fired from his job. Oh, and you won't even have a place to live. So don't cross me, puppy, you hear me? Jenna smiled and waved her hand, and a large purple mug with some writing on it tumbled to the floor. No, shouted Michael. Oh, Michael, how could you break Jennifer's favorite mug? The woman asked in a deliberately loud voice. Jennifer flew into the kitchen and saw the purple shards with the guy standing next to it. Michael sighed and gave Jenna a long look. These were his last days in this apartment, because soon this woman would kick him and his father out. He realized that, but even more he realized that he couldn't change his mind, otherwise he would be on the street. Michael was sitting at home when Jennifer called and asked him to come over. He was on sick leave, and when he heard about Jennifer's problems, he realized that he would have to take a mini vacation. Mary was happy to help open the sick leave. To summarize Michael, he is a very kind person. Yes, in high school and even in college, he never shone with excessive discipline and obedience. And what a sin to say, in the army too, more than once he was caught in the boorishness of his superiors. However, with time, it passed, and he began to take everything easier. He never refused to help anyone, but at the same time he was not particularly appreciated in the teaching staff. He often ridiculed other teachers, taking the side of the students, realizing perfectly well that he had once been the same. Of course, no one could fire him. He did not violate any rules, but good relations could not be built. The once popular boy has turned into a man who rarely leaves the house. Most of his friends left for other cities, and those who remained have families. Michael rarely went on vacation, devoting most of his time to work. Jennifer became a ray of light in his boring and ordinary life. He even enjoyed going to abandoned houses and trying to find Jennifer's father. Michael got in his car and drove to the address. He didn't know what Jennifer had in mind there, but he didn't care. Talking to her gave him pleasure. He was no longer thinking about how to make it through the weekend. His head was filled with other thoughts. The door to the apartment was open. Michael, you? Come in, shouted a female voice from the far room. The man made his way there and saw a large desk piled with folders, next to which stood a laptop covered in pictures. What kind of archive summary is this? Michael grinned and threw his backpack on the couch. I asked a friend from the police to send me all the documents from my father's missing persons case. How did he get them so fast? Wait, you drove to another city overnight to get them. Jennifer, have you lost your mind? What about the daughter? She was with Nancy. Jennifer waved it off and walked over to the stack of files. Let's see everything. You're crazy, don't you think? Michael asked, approaching the table. I need to find the culprit, or my father won't be able to go back to normal. Yeah. Let's just hurry up, shall we? You can take care of the laptop. There's a file with all of Dad's biography, his phone calls, possessions, and everything. An acquaintance did it. An acquaintance? I'm getting scared. We worked with him before he moved away. He's got access to the database, so he's been a big help. Come on, the sooner we start, the sooner we're done. By the way, Molly's gonna be here soon. I gotta figure out what to tell her. A few hours later, the front door slammed and Molly came running into the room. She was happy and cheerful. obviously wanting to tell her mother something. But when she saw the strange man, she was embarrassed. "Hello," she said quietly. Michael smiled and waved. Jennifer took her daughter to the kitchen. She was not there for a long time, so the man decided not to waste time. He continued to leaf through the files. His gaze stopped on the largest file marked by the author of the list. The man opened it and began to read slowly and thoughtfully. With each line, he was surprised more and more. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. Jennifer came back in and quietly closed the door. She was really tired. She had already gone to bed. Good thing tomorrow was a day off. No homework to do. Where was she up late? At a friend's. Did you find something? What do you know about your father's business? Jennifer shrugged. I was 10. I wasn't really interested in it then. And when I was, there was no one to ask. Did you know why you and your mother didn't get the business? Yeah, they weren't married, so my mom's last name is Clark, and we didn't get my grandmother's 4-bedroom apartment. Not for that reason, there's another. Listen carefully. When opening your father's firm, there was a condition that the shares cannot be inherited in the family line. That is, when one of the partners dies or his withdrawal from the company, all shares go to the remaining partners of the firm. Is this legal? Yes, but it's rare. I suspect your father didn't think much of family when he started the firm. He and Mom got together later. But that's not all. Do you know how many partners there were? Jennifer shook her head and climbed onto the couch with her feet up. 4. Your father, Wilson, Parker, and Smith. Do you know how many are left now? 1 Parker, you think? Wait. 3 years before your dad went missing, Wilson died, heart attack at 41. That early? That's weird and more than that. The thing is, in the will he left, your father inherited the stock. But it's possible, under the bylaws, he had no right to transfer the stock to outsiders, but he transferred it to a partner. And your father got a controlling interest and the ability to run the firm pretty much on his own. But why would Wilson do that? The boat my father made for Molly had a sign on it that's on my boat. Wilson James. I don't remember much about my father, but I do know that my father fell in love with the sea when he met a friend of his, and everything in the house connected to the sea was connected to that friend. I couldn't remember his name, but I think it was Wilson. So he left a will to his father. Perhaps he knew or felt something. But that's not all. 5 years after your father went missing, Smith died of an accident. 5 years, that's the time after which a person is declared dead. Jennifer said thoughtfully, and so passes by law the firm, the remaining partners. And Parker, to get the full package, gets rid of the second partner and remains the sole owner of the firm. The woman whispered, So you think my father was eliminated to get the inheritance? Yes, I suspect that Parker and Smith conspired to get the 50% of the firm that your father had. How did this go unnoticed? Didn't it become suspicious to anyone? Jennifer asked incomprehensively to herself, rather than to Michael. Money decides everything. You know who lives and who doesn't. The only thing that confuses me is the fact that your father is alive. Wilson and Smith are dead, and your father isn't. And that's easy. I think those who wanted to get rid of my father just hit him and threw him in some quarry. I don't know, but he survived, and luckily he lost his memory. It's scary to realize that. Michael confessed and prostrated himself. Do you have any coffee? Jennifer nodded and got up from the couch, her eyes a little hazy. She wasn't looking around. Her eyes were focused on one point. Are you okay? Michael asked gently. So is there coffee? A few minutes later, She was already standing with a coffee pot and brewing coffee. "Aren't you busy tomorrow? Why don't you sit with Molly? I'm going to go into town and visit Parker. I want to ask him something." Michael, who had been sitting at the table before, jumped up and in 2 steps was next to Jennifer. "Are you out of your mind? We assumed a minute ago that he was responsible for 2 people being dead and 120 years without memory, and you decide to go straight to him and claim you know he's a criminal." "Don't yell," Jennifer said tiredly and lowered her gaze to Michael's hands that held her by the shoulders. She could feel his warmth and his strong grip. "Let me go, or the coffee will be on the floor in a few seconds." Slowly lowering her gaze to her hands, Michael shuffled all the way back. He did it unknowingly. "Are you worried?" Jennifer asked, not demanding an answer. "I've worked with personalities like that, so you don't have to worry about my safety." "I'll go with you," the man said firmly. His confident gaze looked directly at Jennifer. "No arguments. Yeah, I get it. Why are you bothering with me and my problems?" Jennifer asked as they sat down at the table and began to drink coffee. Michael was taken aback and looked at the woman uncomprehendingly. "Well, you know, when I met you, the negative emotions that I experienced as a child flared up in my soul. It's childish, I know. Well, haven't you ever had that?" A quiet chuckle escaped Michael's lips, and he shook his head. "No. Maybe it's because I've never felt negative about you." Jennifer gasped. "What do you mean? You were always building a sneak attack." "Yeah, you said you talked nonsense when you didn't want me to dwell on my thoughts, but that wasn't always the case. I mean, you broke the mug my friends gave me, you broke my headphones, you made fun of me at school, and even blew off boys I dated. You were ruining my life." Jennifer spoke slowly, trying to control the emotions that had suddenly flared up. "Remember the new headphones for my birthday?" "Yes, that was the only gift from Aunt Jenna in all the years." "Why are you looking at me like that?" "No. Wasn't that a gift from her?" Michael grinned. He squinted at the woman, trying to figure out how someone so smart and savvy could be so stupid at times. "The guys and I worked part-time during the summer, and I used the money to buy them. I didn't have enough to buy them, though. I had to borrow some from my father. It was his stash in case of a hangover. He gave me a hell of a beating." Jennifer looked at the man confused. She gently took his hand and tilted her head. "Why?" "You needed them so you wouldn't listen to me. I saw how worried you were about them. I thought you hated me, and you did. I liked you, Jennifer, and I was a silly boy who expressed sympathy through. You understand. Trite, huh?" Jennifer stared incomprehensively in front of her. In an instant, her world had been turned upside down. She could sense that something was wrong, but could never quite figure out what. Coping with her emotions, the woman jumped up from the table and announced, "It's decided. We're going into town tomorrow. Jennifer, darling, is that you?" "Were you about 13 when I last saw you?" asked Kevin Parker, an older man in an expensive suit. He jumped up from his chair as soon as he realized who had come to see him. Michael and Jennifer eyed the man warily, not understanding why he was so welcoming to them. He took them to the local cafeteria and ordered a few not-so-cheap meals himself. "Don't worry, I'm paying. After all, this firm was built by your father's labor and sweat, so it's a shame you couldn't find him. It was you who paid for 8 years to find him." Asked Michael, and Jennifer looked at him shocked. "Yes, I had hoped to find something, but he just disappeared into thin air. All your partners have disappeared strangely, don't you think?" "Uh-oh. I recognize my father's grip." Kevin grinned and smiled sadly. "Yes, it was. I honestly could never believe it was an accident. First James, then John, then Jack. One after another. For 6 years, I only took the garbage out with the guards. I was afraid I'd get the same fate. Weren't you the one who set up that account? Jennifer asked snidely. No, I had no reason to. At least Jack's death. After your father went missing, I got the controlling interest, not Jack. Well, I mean, he split it between us, but I got 51%. But what's 100 better? Young man, you've probably never run a big firm on your own. Believe me, it's not that easy. I was going to give some of my shares to Jack to do the main management, and Jack knew about it, along with some lawyers who were drawing up the contract. And then Jack died by accident, and there was definitely an accident here. 2 other workers died on that construction site. There was a safety violation. The site was just shut down. It's all in Jack's file, so I had nothing to do with it. Kevin smiled sadly and sipped water from his glass. Besides, I had nothing to do with John's disappearance. I had no idea what time he was going home. Only Jack knew his flight time. Jennifer looked at Michael with confusion. If Kevin was to be believed, their version was crumbling before their eyes. And Jack Smith, how had he behaved in the years since John had disappeared? Michael asked gently. He was always calling someone and nervous. I was sure he'd just gotten himself a woman. You could hear in his voice that he was calling a woman, and that was just normal for him. He was always very jumpy and restless. They say that's why he died. You have to stay calm on a construction site. Jennifer and Michael asked Kevin a couple more questions and left. Already in the car, they looked at each other confused. You don't think it's him? Not only did he spend 8 years paying for the search, but he also erected a huge monument to your father. I read in the files he was actually going to give 10% of the shares to Smith, which would have made him the leader. I don't think he just changed his mind and decided to take him out. And he couldn't have been involved in Wilson's death because he was in Israel for over 6 months for treatment, said Michael and looked up from his laptop. How do you know all this? I wrote to the very person you know on your behalf, and he sent me the information on Parker and Smith. Jennifer snatched the laptop out of Michael's hands and took a deep breath. Who gave you permission? You didn't think I'd let you go talk to an alleged criminal, did you? Jennifer turned away from Michael, muttering something quietly under her breath. But Michael could see the edge of a smile on the woman's face. I can't get over the fact that Smith was calling someone all the time. Who was it? 20 years ago, not everyone had a cell phone, and most people called from landlines, which means that somewhere could have saved the number of that lady. Unless, of course, there's still some of Smith's stuff somewhere. Michael concluded. Jennifer grinned and started the car. I read something too. I can't believe you got into the house. Michael hissed and sneezed. Jennifer drove them to the house where Smith once lived. Because he had no one, the house was left vacant and was just another abandoned building. Nobody actually lives here, so I don't see anything wrong with that. You ripped the boards off the windows with a tire iron and climbed in. Michael objected. Oh, it's nothing. We'll write it off to the teenagers. She shrugged her shoulders and walked on, shining a flashlight on her way. Here, shouted Michael. Jennifer walked over and saw the phone with the phone book next to it. How will we know which number we need? The woman shrugged and opened the dusty old book. Michael and Jennifer sneezed at the dust rising. So many years had passed after all. The book flipped through very quickly. Pages skipped until Jennifer saw a number written in red pen. Judging by the spread of the book, it was the page that had been opened the most, and the number had been circled several times in pencil. It wasn't signed, Michael noticed. It doesn't need to be, Jennifer said sadly. I know it by heart. They walked outside in a terrible mood, not knowing how to react to the news. Michael looked directly into Jennifer's eyes. He moved closer to her and kissed her. Jennifer was taken aback. "What are you doing?" "You just broke into the house, found the culprit, well, almost, and probably helped your dad. You're awesome, you know that? You're not what I thought you were either." Jennifer confessed and blushed. "Is this the first time in your life you've ever admitted you were wrong?" Michael grinned, and Jennifer punched him painfully in the shoulder. "You can't make me change my mind." Jennifer smiled imperceptibly. "Jenna, is that you?" A tall man in black clothing asked, holding out his ID card in front of him. "Did you know Smith Jack?" asked the investigator to Jenna when she was at the police station. "No." The woman replied hysterically. "Your phone number was found in his address book, and there are witnesses who saw you together." "So what?" "He was my lover." Jenna stuck her head up high. "Yes, and also the mastermind behind the attack on your brother. He was the only one who knew when he was going home. John was attacked near the train station." "An attack?" screamed Jenna. "Are you out of your mind? Why would I hurt my own brother?" "Your mother's 4-bedroom apartment." Clear and concise, the investigator replied. "You were up to your neck in debt that year. You had a loan." "Yes, and I suspect not only to banks were owed, and immediately after receiving the inheritance in 6 months, you put the apartment for sale, and it was very quickly bought, which suggests that the buyer was found early. You paid off the debt, got rid of your brother, whose not small bank account went to you and his daughter, but since she was small, her mother put her money aside. And after Susan died, you got the leftovers. That's where you got the money for the Beaumont parties, Jenna, isn't it?" The investigator asked snidely. "Your niece has provided all the evidence that will help me put you away for a long time, as well as solve a 20-year-old case. So you can look for a lawyer, Jenna. You will definitely need one." The investigator was an old friend of Jennifer's. She had heard the entire conversation, thanks to the recorded phone. They listened to the tapes along with Michael, the man holding Jennifer's hand. "You win." He smiled. "We did," corrected Jennifer and squeezed Michael's hand harder. 3 years later, in front of the 3-story house, a large truck with a transportation sign stopped. 2 uniformed men got out of the truck and walked toward the house. They had keys. An older Mazda parked next to the truck, from which a blonde-haired man with a large bag on his shoulder got out. He looked around the area and opened the back door. A tall girl, about 11 years old, stepped out. She was smiling cheerfully and looking around, hoping to spot something interesting. She was holding a large paper boat. A short, bald old man with a beard got out of the passenger seat. He shouted something to the porters. "Where's Jennifer?" John asked Michael in a husky voice. "Was she supposed to get here before us?" Michael shrugged and pulled out his cell phone to dial Jennifer's number. "She's probably hanging out with the criminals again. Such nice weather, she's working again." The old man complained. Nature was in full bloom. May was in full bloom, the smell of lilacs everywhere. The sun was shining so brightly that it seemed as if summer had already arrived. The trees were covered with little leaves, birds were singing on all sides, and the pond behind the house glistened in the sun. It really was grace, not weather, but Jennifer was at work again. She had been spending too much time there lately. That was Michael's opinion. "Uncle Michael, look!" Molly shouted and pointed to the road, where a police car with flashing lights was coming almost at full speed. About 100 meters from the 3-story house, she turned off her lights and began to slow down. The police Ford stopped in front of Michael. Jennifer jumped out of the back seat and waved to the driver and his partner. "Thanks, guys, I'll owe you one." "Good luck." Jennifer turned back to her family and was met with shocked looks. "Why, you actually took my car, so I had to improvise. Where have you been?" Michael asked, "Were you going to miss the housewarming party?" Jennifer rolled her eyes and walked toward the house. She was in a great mood, and even the nagging of her favorite person wouldn't ruin this beautiful day. For the first time in years, she felt at home. In an unfinished building, where they had just brought the sealed furniture, but this place was truly her own. Her whole family would gather under one roof, and for the first time in a long time, the woman felt happy. "By the way, were you supposed to be at work too?" Jennifer remarked snidely, showing the movers where to carry the big couch. "It was your class that put on the Metallica concert near the principal's house. You got a call, but you didn't answer." "I don't take work numbers on weekends." Michael muttered and wondered what kind of reprimand he'd get on Monday when he got back to his favorite class. The head teacher had told him not to take those slackers, but how could he refuse them? It was almost impossible. Oh, he'd probably lose his bonus. Although, it would seem, what's he got to do with it? End of the year guys are out for their last free year. Why touch them? Snapping her fingers in front of Michael's eyes, Jennifer chuckled and walked into the house. These blackouts often happened when the man was thinking about something. It had been especially so in the last year. If someone had told Jennifer 15 years ago about what Michael would be thinking, she would have twisted her finger at her temple. Molly ran into the house first and immediately rushed to the second floor, where she chose the largest and most beautiful room. True, there was nothing special about it yet, but Grandpa already had a plan to please his granddaughter. John had not recovered all of his memory, but he had definitely gotten some of it back. He couldn't testify at the trial against his sister because the doctors wouldn't give him permission. However, the prosecutor still referred to his memories. However, and without his help, Jenna was sentenced to 11 years in a general security colony, and all the money and the apartment returned to the owner. It is worth recognizing that Mary turned out to be a good doctor. The first successes in the treatment of John appeared after a couple of months, and 6 months later he already remembered his daughter. A year later, he remembered almost all the events of the last 30 years of his life. However, it was very difficult to fully recover his memory. Jennifer has never been able to get from her father's memories of how he met her mother. Yes, and much that was before the birth of his daughter, he did not remember. However, that didn't make him any less loved. Molly almost immediately got used to her grandfather, spent a lot of time with him, and often asked for help. John taught his granddaughter how to make ships out of paper and was very happy to have a family again. He recalled with a sad smile the years he spent on the streets. Michael also became friends with his father-in-law, although it must be admitted that for a long time he could not get used to him. His grouchiness and slight arrogance kept John from trusting his son-in-law. Jennifer was walking up the stairs to the top of the stairs. She took Michael under her arm and pulled him to the 3rd floor. There was the largest room with a huge window and a small terrace. Jennifer and Michael had chosen this place for themselves together. The woman wanted to arrange on the terrace a corner of rest with flowers, and Michael dreamed of sitting there and reading books. However, their desires did not contradict each other. As soon as the hatch leading to the stairs slammed shut, Jennifer spun in place and started laughing loudly. Michael looked at her with a half smile. "Have you decided to go crazy?" "I guess you just know. I feel like this is the first white streak in my life, like there were none before, a lifetime-long black streak." Michael slowly walked over to Jennifer and hugged her. "May the white streak be as long as the black streak." Jennifer reached into her bag with her hand and pulled out a time-yellowed, framed ship from there. It was here, In this room, that the symbol of their happy life would hang,